settling comfortably. Tonight is a quiet walk through the Roman world, from the morning mist over the Tiber to the measured shadows of aqueducts, from wax on tablets and the steady marks of a clerk to key rings at Ostia, where ropes remember their knots. We'll move at the pace of milestones, unhurried. A foreman strikes a measure in a granary. A scribe dries a seal. An inspector weighs grain. A conduit teaches stone to carry water. And the road makes mountains into a single day. War stays far off, like whether beyond a pass near at hand are crafts, routines, and the small instruments that hold a vast order: lamp, chord, scales, key, and arch. This story flows gently like evening light across a forum, like water in a vaulted channel. If sleep arrives, let it. The road will keep your place. The first part. Morning does not begin with trumpets, it begins with breath. The Tiber exhales a thin river mist, and the city takes it in: stone, wood, leather, wool. Light loosens from the eastern ridge and learns the language of brick. Arches those patient ribs accept weight, and time the way old hands accept rings. A cart somewhere lifts its front board and lets a sack settle. A key turns once in a granary door, not twice. Bread is imagined before it is sliced. On the river stairs a clerk warms his fingers and smooths a wax tablet with the flat of a stylus. The wax learns today's surface. He notes a barge, low in the water, hemp steaming where night dew met rope. He writes the name of the warehouse, 2 marks for weight, and a small circle for the seal that will follow. Behind him the key ring keeps its round, a mooring line bows to it politely. Things that kept shape in the dark have earned the right to be consulted in the light. A foreman arrives with a rod and a small wooden box. The rod is a rule that agrees with roads, the box holds weights that have outlived many pockets. At the gate he greets a guard who has slept exactly enough to be kind. Together they watch the first carriers come in under the arch. One man puts down his yoke and rolls a shoulder, another rolls a story from yesterday back into silence. Work begins with the exchange of small courtesies that keep larger courtesies possible. The road outside is still damp where hooves wrote and wheels underlined. A milestone stands at the bend like a patient finger. A boy passing with a bundle up out of habit and counts silently not so much the miles as the moods of miles. A mile under pines, a mile alongside vineyard, a mile with swallows immodestly proving the air. The via is not a line, it is a promise kept in segments. When the sun reaches the stone's rounded head, carts take it as permission to make decisions. At the Harium, the brick granary, whose walls hold coolness as a craft, the first door rises on its timber pins. A smell of summer stored for winter comes out, calm and persuasive. The steward sets a modius on the table, a wooden grain measure, honest by design, and checks its rim with his thumbnail. The scratch along that rim is a law made by use. A carrier tips his sack grain, behaves like well-mannered rain. The steward lifts, levels, and moves the measure to the tally area, where chalk learns numbers it can keep. Annona, the store for the city's belly, does not shout it counts. Across the yard a seal is warmed, pressed, and cooled. Nothing dramatic happens. The cord that holds the sack learns a knot that will open before it argues, and will remember it was tied. The seal leaves a face that was carved to be recognized in bad weather as well as in good. A boy is allowed to hold it for a moment. He feels the authority of metal and the kindness of not keeping it. He will remember the weight in his palm, as the name has gone to sleep in his hearing. Water runs where it is told and pretends to have invented obedience. Columns of the aqueduct throw their shadows forward, like long signatures across fields and lanes. A maintenance pair walks the service track beside the channel. One carries a hooked pole, the other a leather bag that has seen more weather than most roofs. They stop at a weir and remove a reed that had ideas. The reed surrenders without drama. The channel resumes its soft argument with gravity, and the city maintains its right to baths, fountains, and the idea that thirst can be answered without a drumbeat. In a portico near the forum, a scribe rubs pumice on a piece of papyrus until the surface decides to be patient. He copies a schedule: 3 barges today, 5 tomorrow. A delay, a priver thanks to a sandbank that will not be lectured. He adds a line: weights checked at dawn. The letters walk a straight road. He warms the blob of wax with a flame that does not strut, lowers a seal, and leaves a memory that can be carried without arguing with rain. Ostia's morning is a cousin to Rome's. Key rings take rope cranes, remember geometry, amphorae clink neck against neck with the politeness of vessels that know fragility without fuss. A dockman smears a bolt with tallow to spare fibers their quarrel with iron. He lifts a line out of a puddle and lays it where sun is promised. He does not discuss this with anyone. The city runs on thousands of such unannounced repairs that are their own applause. At a milestone marker on the river road, a cart breaks a pin. The driver does not panic. He has a spare on the inside rail where spares prefer to wait. He lifts the axle with a lever and a stone, a duet older than Latin. A passerby offers his hand and holds the opposite wheel steady for a count of 5. The pin goes in, the cotter follows. The driver nods, the passerby nods back, and the world continues in a tone that suits listening. The milestone approves by doing nothing at all. In a bakery court, the first loaves go to a man with a wax tablet stamped public. He takes them in a basket that tells every hand where to hold. A ring fixed in the bench leg prevents rope from stealing work from fingers. He writes a dot, then a line, then the quick little curve that means the row is complete for this street. Bread travels faster than words because mouths make better promises than news. In the shade of an arch, a scale is set up, 2 pans, 3 stones, 1 truth. A woman brings wool, a man brings salt, each watches the beam, and then each other. The scale is the only opinion that matters, and it is not an opinion. The weights have names in 3 languages, and none of them are approximately. The arm goes level, silver changes hands. Both parties find that accuracy feels a lot like dignity. Children learn this before they learn proverbs. The Tiber stairs receive another barge, lower than the first. Men in tunics stained by honest labor make the world smaller in neat bundles. Rope into coils, sacks into rows, amphorae into triangles that forgive passing feet. A clerk, the first one from dawn, now with warmer fingers and a more decisive stylus, catches the barge's name and makes the mark that will become a tax, that will become a road, that will become the shade of a tree where someone will sit and be grateful. Systems turn sweat into shade. That is one of Rome's quieter talents. Under the aqueduct, a small stall opens a tray of oil lamps. Their spouts like birds at rest. The lamp maker trims 1 wick and lights it even though the sun is climbing. Flame holds steady in a breeze because the cup was shaped by hands that understood air's temper. A beer weighs a lamp in her palm and imagines it by her threshold. She pays, and the maker wraps the lamp in cloth that remembers olives. Tiny economies, good manners, trusted shapes. Cities sleep at night because all of this happens in the morning without announcement. A surveyor steps into the road where it meets a square and stretches a cord between 2 marks. He carries small bronze pegs and a wax tablet with a grid that fools no one. He makes a triangle of sight lines that would bore a poet and delight a mason. A team will lay new stone where wheels have insisted to long. The surveyor chews a sprig and draws a line with his stylus that will move stone by and by. He knows he serves 2 masters, water and weight. He offends neither. News travels by sandals and by silence. A courier from the relay house cursus publicus. The road's own breath opens his packet, checks a seal for injury, closes it again without changing the way the knot thinks, and drinks water at a fountain that has not failed anyone today. He sets off with a stride that belongs to the road more than to his legs. The fountain returns to its even work. Its spout never applauds departures, it prefers arrivals. In a bath complex, the furnace man slides a shovel along ash that has lost ambition. Above him, water hurries into heat and learns patience on the way. At the frigidarium, a boy carries buckets because boys are the best machines for buckets. An old man, already in the cold pool, because cold has always been his strongest argument, smiles without moving anything else. To friends sit on a bench in the tepidarium and say sensible things about the price of fish that will not be remembered beyond the corner of that bench. Clean is a policy here, not a mood. Back at the harem, a second measure is checked by the steward. He compares modius to modius, because even measures must live under measures. Sacks wear chalk marks like mild decorations. A crate is sealed with a cord, and wax the stamp goes in. Comes out with a face-to-face means someone who is not here will accept what is inside without pasture. A boy returns the seal to its pouch with an air that understands ceremony is best when small. The forum fills by degrees, not by edict. The steps learn pairs of sandals in conversation. A seller of fresh figs does mathematics with his thumb. A marble cutter lifts his mallet and then sets it down because the day has chosen to be a day of errands rather than a day of noise. The sun finds the high edges of entablatures and prints their shade on the ground like a stencil of order. A dog decides where to lie by studying knees. By noon a wind comes up the river and teaches flax what to do with attention. A clerk at a custom house ties his tablet with a loop that will open before it argues and sets it inside a chest whose key prefers to be turned once. He looks up, not down, to rest his eyes properly. When he looks down again, numbers are willing to be numbers and not birds. Across the bridge, a woman leads a mule with panniers that know their balance. The mule corrects itself at the crown of the road in a way that shows it has learned to be its own help. A soldier on leave carries sandals in his hand and lets the cobbles remind his feet who is emperor here. He passes under an arch and feels smaller in a way that makes him larger. He remembers a winter at a frontier and decides that this city is worth the distance he walked to see it again. Later, when shadows lean, a lad at the quay takes the morning line now warm, now dry, and teaches it a new knot. He ties it, unties it, ties it again. He learns the feeling of a rope that will open when it is told, and he learns the feeling of being told by a rope. He looks at the ring in the stone and feels that some shapes are teachers without tongues. Even later, back at the Tiber stairs, the first clerk closes his tablet by folding its cover down onto the day's impressions. The wax holds the news without gossip. He ties the cord, the knot behaves, the seal sits there, patient in its little circle, ready to prove itself in wind or in doubt. He puts the tablet in a bag and sets the bag in a nook behind a door that will accept a key at dusk. He looks at the river and forgives it for being the most opinionated employee in the city. Pocket pictures to keep, a modius levelled and left, a seal that leaves a face and takes a responsibility, a rod's shadow agreeing with a road, a cord that makes a triangle, a ring that keeps its round when nobody watches, water that behaves where arches tell it to, a flame that refuses to swagger, weights that know their names, a milestone that does not mind being counted, a tablet that remembers what hands prefer to forget. None of this asks for applause. All of it adds up. The empire does not wake by drum, it wakes by habits. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, and arches small instruments, vast order. If sleep arrives, let it. Rome moves at a human pace, and the road will keep your place. The second part. The road does not begin at the gate, it begins in a courtyard behind the gate, where hooves are groomed into silence, and leather learns today's buckle hole. At a relay house, the stableman lifts a blanket that remembers yesterday's sweat, and gives the horse its morning grammar brush, curry, palm to flank, water to chin. He runs a finger along the strap that failed last month, and didn't fail yesterday, and won't fail today. A boy counts nails in a small wooden cup, and whispers a number, as if numbers were animals that come when spoken to. In the office of the Mancio, a woman with ink on her middle finger opens a box with 3 compartments. The left holds seals, the middle holds keys, the right holds scraps of wax that will become new notes. She turns a key once in the coffer where root tablets sleep, and lays out today's strip, station to station, a day's reach folded into names. She ties a leather thong through the top so the tablet can hang against a chest and learn the pace of a ribcage. Outside, the yard smells of hay that carried the moon on its back all night. A courier arrives with the polite speed of someone accustomed to being trusted. The knot on his packet looks as if it would open before it argued. It does not open now. He drinks from the ladle hung by the cistern ladle. Rope, hook, stone lid. the assembly line of thirst. He hands over a token, receives a fresh mount stamped on the forehead with a tiny circle of soot, a station's little moon. The stableman checks the girth with the back of his knuckles. The courier swings up, finds in the saddle the old conversation between leather and bone, and is gone the way a sentence continues after a comma. Out on the via, a pair of surveyors stand with a gromer, a cross on a staff with plumb lines that argue with wind and forgive it. One sights a line, the other plants a peg. They make right angles out of air. A road, to keep its promise, must be a sentence that can be read in both directions. At a dip where winter puddles have earned too much tenure, labourers lay dressed stone on a bed of compacted layers rubble, gravel, the hard grammar of drainage. A foreman holds the rod, its shadow meets a mark he knots. Water, seeing the angle, knows where to go when rain remembers the map. A bridge ahead, small as a song that stays, gets its maintenance. To masons lean over the parapet and point together finger, mortar seam, a boy below mixes lime with sand, adding water with the prudence of an old man. He slaps the trowel flat and smooth, then notches the surface, so future repairs will have something to hold. An arch accepts this the way a back accepts the hand that understands pain and its opposite. Underneath, a mule team slows to admire geometry without knowing they admire it. At midday heat, the road walks into hills and finds its own hospitality. A culvert lets the winter stream pass like a guest with good manners. The embankment stands at the angle it prefers, grass stitched into it by last spring's roots. A milestone glows pale among grasses, its top rounded by hands and weather. A traveller touches it the way one touches a friend, not seen 4 months. Brief, certain, enough. He moves on with boots that have learned to be their own counsel. The courier reaches a mutatio horse change post where everything is a hinge. A farrier checks hooves with a nail, the length of a proverb. He draws the rasp in even strokes that sand time into shape. A leather worker repairs a strap, pricking new holes with an awl that carries a little polish where fingers have taught it to be companionable. She ties off the thread with a square knot that will knock back into air's bad ideas. A pot of lentils, still warm, proves that food and schedules are friends if you keep your fire modest and your expectations reasonable. In the shade of a wayside shrine, a road keeper eats bread and olives and studies wheels the way a physician studies breath. He notes ruts with a stick and speaks to boys with shovels. Here, not there pull, not push heap, not scatter. They learn, and the road grows briefly younger under their attention. He trims back the brush that leans toward ditches. Ditches should be company, not conversation. A snake slips away, uninterested in civic order. The road keeper wipes his knife on grass and considers the virtue of well-placed boredom. Farther along, a bridge over a river that pretends to be larger than it is holds a checkpoint of courtesy. A tax clerk soaks his sponge and smooths a wax tablet. He asks 4 names, goods, destinations without suspicion. A rope across the lane, knotted to open, points the way to patience. Merchants answer with numbers that will become roads in other mouths. The clerk presses a seal into a blob of wax on a tally strip and hangs the strip on a nail with other strips. A small forest of obligations that shade no one and frighten nobody. The courier dismounts only to water his horse, because speed that lasts is quieter than speed that brags. He leads the animal to a trough where a spout carves a constant shape in falling water. The horse drinks, blinks, and admires nothing. The courier cups his hands, drinks, and admires the way cold makes inside air rearrange. He checks the knot on his packet without touching it. The knot enjoys being checked and not handled. An hour later, the road finds a valley of olives that have cultivated the talent of remembering rain. The light here is a language children learn without trying. Pale, leaf silver, shadow lace. A rope tied between 2 trunks holds jars hung by their handles to dry after a rinse in a ditch where water believes it has a holy job. A woman lifts one jar, looks at the shoulder line that marks fullness and nods. Her son watches the nod, not the jar. He is learning the world by remark more than by rule. In the next town, the forerup is the size of its confidence. A fountain in the middle tells strangers where the high street goes. A smith straightens a bent iron tire by heating it until it forgets and cooling it until it remembers the correct way. Boys carry the tire to the wheel with the solemn thrill of being allowed to touch heat that has become furniture. The smith sets the tire, quenching his bragging only to the nearest cobbles. He taps the rim, a tone like a bell that has learned humility. At the post house a map hangs that cannot be read from the road, no legible marks, only colours of imagined distance. A woman unties her apron, reties it tighter, and carries bowls to a table where stone cutters eat as if stone were a seasoning. One produces from his purse a thin bit of wire with a loop at one end, their line for plumb, and lets it dangle, admiring the simplest honest thing in the building, weight teaching ere its place. The other laughs because truth keeps choosing ugly tools and handsome results. If sleep arrives, let it. A road that exists is already a kindness, a road maintained is a promise kept. Dusk brings the courier to the next station, where lamps are lit with a match of shaved cedar and a breath. He hands the packet to the postmaster, woman who counts by moving her thumb along a rope with knots at measured intervals. She listens to the horse the way a midwife listens. Hoof, breath, eye, sweat, salt, grain and seal, she says. And the boy in the corner brings out both. The courier eats bread he did not ask for and drinks watered wine that respects thirst without courting regret. He sleeps 2 hours long and wakes with the face of someone whose profession is not lying to time. Between stations, the road crosses a causeway where Marsh insisted on being argument and engineers insisted on being grammar. Piles sunk, stones laid, drains cut, reeds persuaded to be neighbours. A fisherman sits on a plank with a net that looks like writing for a language fish prefer. He mends one mesh and leaves the tier a little smaller than his pride. Tomorrow he will finish. He offers the courier a fig. To men who will never learn each other's names, exchange the custody of a sweetness and refuse to make a speech. Past midnight, which belongs to the Middle Ages in other stories, and to everyone else in this one. A wagon arrives at the mutatio with a broken thumb on the right trace. The leather worker, half asleep, replaces it with a piece that kept itself oiled by being wrapped in linen. She cuts, punches, threads, and ties. The knot sits like a promise made by a tired person who keeps promises. The wagon moves on, coins down, thanks up. Someone yawns in Latin, which is a language that knows how to make even yawns sound employed. Toward dawn, the relay house wakes the day shift horses with the politeness of grain shaken in a bucket. The stableman checks hooves with a candle stub, not because candlelight reveals truth, but because it refuses to exaggerate. The postmaster wraps the previous day's tablets with a strip of cloth and ties them with a loop she would now open instantly if someone asked. No one asks. She puts the bundle in a chest whose key is turned once. The chest accepts responsibility without pasture. If sleep arrives, let it. Roads do their best work when you are not watching them. Pocket pictures to store along the way. A Gromer's plumb line steadying when wind runs out of opinions. A culvert dry today, but satisfied with its cunning. A milestones, rounded head warm from a brief palm. A trowel's flat speech. Across a seam a rope looped to assist and ladle. A horse's forehead marked with the station's small moon. A leather all shining, where fingers taught it manners. A square not quiet as a good sentence. A tack strip hanging with others, like filed weather. A spout's constant fall. A tire's tone, deliquenching. A knotted measuring rope, sliding under a counting thumb. A chest key that believes in once. A fig given without name. The empire's speed, when it chooses to have any, is made of such patience. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches. The instruments have not changed, only the distances they comfort. The rest is the rhythm of hooves and the courtesy of schedules. The third part. Water does not arrive as a miracle, it arrives as a habit. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a spring argues kindly with rock, and stone agrees to be cut. A channel begins to slope with a patience that would shame a calendar. Brick lips give it a voice. Lime closes the old quarrels between grains of sand, where the land undulates. Arches learn to walk step after step, rib after rib, until a valley becomes a suggestion, not a refusal. Where the ground is high, The channel dives in covered tunnels that keep winter from meddling and summer from boasting. The gradient is a secret shared between a drop and a distance, to keep us walk the service path along the aqueduct before the sun can make opinions. One carries a hooked pole that has saved more hats than it has saved cities, the other a leather bag with small tools that remember every leak they cured. At a settling basin, they lift a slab and find silt behaving like polite cloud. With a wooden scoop they persuade cloud to go elsewhere. A reed that tried to argue with a sluice is shown the gate. They lower the lid and mark a chalk line on the parapet, once still fine. Far below, a vineyard learns the shade of arches and thanks without speaking. Where arches meet the city, the channel becomes shire. It passes over a last quiet span, slips into a stone box. The castellum Aqueduct divides itself like a host who knows how to seat a difficult supper. 3 outlets, sometimes 4, each with a stop, each a promise. One line leads to fountains, because cups have claims. 1 to baths, because work has its opposite. 1 to private houses that understood the price and keep their pipes honest. A keeper turns a bronze key shaped like a question and listens. The water answers by not changing its mind. Downstream, the first fountain of the day clears its throat and becomes the city's smallest parliament. A woman with a jar waits her turn as if patience were a style. A boy who ran too fast pretends he is not catching his breath. A man sets a bucket under the lip and lets the spout right in it. The habit is older than any story any one of them could tell. It feels like fairness that learned to flow. A dog drinks sideways with the cheer of someone always admitted. The woman wipes the rim of her jar with the corner of her scarf, because courtesy travels farther than water. In the bath complex, water learns the arts of temperature. A furnace man who has married his hands to ash builds the day's fire under brick pillars, the pile that hold the floor up like a reasonable sky. Heat walks between the little columns, climbs clay flues in the walls, and becomes rumour in rooms upstairs. Tepidarium, coldarium, laconicum. A boy brings wood without dropping a stick. This is his school. The stoker checks the drawer at the vent with a feather that reports honestly. He feeds the fire until it is firm, and then leaves it to keep its own promises. At a side door, the attendant lifts a stack of strigils, curved scrapers, bright as morning answers. Olive oil in small amphory waits its trial, poured on skin, worked by hand, lifted by bronze dirt, agrees to travel and does. In the apodyterium, sandals make soft determinations about benches, cloaks remember shoulders and relax. Men nod as if they agreed yesterday and see no reason to rehearse agreement today. In the frigidarium, a ray of cool light lays a silver rule across the pool, and somebody's courage steps over it. He laughs once the sound travels the length of the room and becomes a rumour of health. The aqueduct's line continues underfoot in lead-sheathed channels that change direction without apology. A plumber taps a joint with the back of a knife and listens. Yes, good, don't lie to me. He smears a wrap with something that smells like days. In a courtyard, a pipe delivers to a basin cut from a block that was once a boast and is now a companion. The basin overflows by design into a runnel that feeds a garden, that feeds a shade where a woman will sit and shell beans later. The plumber dries his hands on a rag that would be offended to be new. Back outside, water advertises architecture. An arcade of the aqueduct striding over a low hollow, its signature in shade. A boy walks the shade as if it were a road laid for him personally. He counts 1 bay, 2, 5, 7, loses count, begins again. Counting is not arithmetic, counting is a relationship with time. A vendor sets a tray of lamps at the foot of a pier. Their wicks cut to a humility that holds. He sells one to a man headed to the baths, because even good light needs an errand. Ostia receives its own portion with the com of practice. At the end of a long, covered conduit, a cistern fills behind brick and lime and thinking. An overseer lifts a wooden hatch and sees in the reflected patch of sky a small unreadable book. He closes the hatch and trusts the book to be faithful. Teamsters roll amphory to the public taps, where a steward will allot measure to measure. He checks the rim of his vessel with a thumbnail, the way stewards have checked since checks were invented. He speaks little. Water hears better when men speak less. At the laundries, troughs sit under a roof that remembers other roofs. Workers beat cloth with flat sticks that carry the smooth anger of trees. Soap-wet foam learns patient patterns water darkens, and then lightens again in exchange for labor. A woman's joke travels down the line and returns improved. A child sets a small wicker ball in the mouth of a drain and watches the current take it under and offer it back at the far corner. She believes in loops and is wiser than she knows. In a garden behind a tenement, buckets rise from a covered well whose curbstones have been touched down to a grammar of curbs. A rope passes over a wooden roller that denies friction the pleasure of drama. A clay jar is set shoulder deep in the earth, holding cool as a craft its cork wears a string that always yields. The garden trades water for shade and shade for herbs. Someone snips mint and thinks about fish. The jar thinks about nothing, which is its secret. At noon, the inspector of conduits walks the wet rooms with a measure stick and a humility that suits instruments. He marks a level on a plaster wall with charcoal, a small line, a little law. In the coldarium, he asks the stoker to ease the furnace by a bucket's worth. Heat agrees reluctantly, but obeys. In the apoditerium, he notices a broken hook and makes a note to send a man with a drill and a dowel. He has the face of one who holds doors for strangers and expects the same for his replacements in the next century. He writes only what will be needed, he has burned out the rest. Farther across town, under a different sky, a water seller sings his route without words. He lifts his yoke with the economy of someone who understood the weight before he was shown it. Customers meet him under an arch that has decided to be generous about shade. Coins clink bittersweetly as if metal had feelings about sleep. He balances, he smiles. He steps away with the simple nobility of load and line. A friend calls a joke about a leaky street. To alleys over he answers by rearranging his route. Humor is a kind of map. At the base of the aqueduct, a mason chips back a seam that wept in winter and sulked in spring. He opens the wound to good limits, cleans, washes, dries by a law learned from sun and wind, and lays new mortar with a trowel he inherited from a man who hated hurrying. The scene takes a texture that future hands will be glad to find. He presses a thumbprint into a corner. No one will see. It is not pride, it is a conversation with time. I was here, I did this hold. By late afternoon, the bath has become a thesis in agreement. Friends sit in the tepidarium and speak of stoves, bread, rope, the price of oil. The new boy at the relay house who ties his square knots as if he trusts air. A father shows a son the strigil, the son tries it and understands too much at once how clean and kindness are cousins. An older man who refuses to finish any story outside a warm room finished 3. Steam settles principle on disputed joints. At a fountain near a market gate, 2 figures step back to let a third pass, not because of rank, because the third's jar is heavy. The spout writes its tireless word. The basin says Omen. The overflow runs along a channel and disappears under something built by a mason who could not imagine these feet and did not need to. A child floats a leaf. A vendor lifts a cloth and shows figs that have decided to be figs today. At last, a drummer passes, drumming only with his fingernail against his own wrist. He is out of work and content with it. When shadows lengthen, the aqueduct's ribs learn candor. Light lies along them like a rule. Pigeons find particular bays more endearing than others, but have not published their criteria. A keeper scratches his ear with the handle of the pole, looks along the parapet, and inclines his head to nothing in particular. He and the conduit have been in conversation for years. They offend each other as little as possible. He checks a notch on the key, and the notch on his memory. They agree. If sleep arrives, let it. Water will keep the city's breath, even when your owner's gone quieter. Baths will forgive you for not attending. In the Horia by the river, sealed jars of oil sit in stacks, like well-behaved planets. Their seals carry faces, their cords carry knots that open only for reasons. A clerk walks the aisles with a tablet and marks what is, not what might be. The floor is cool, the air smells like patience, and footsteps happen without urgency. He thinks, briefly, of the last time the river disrespected Mojans and decides to respect them twice today. He chalks a line on a post where a line already was. He smiles at the redundancy and keeps it. On the Aventine slope, a modest house receives a trickle into a basin carved with a pattern that understands being looked at. A lamp burns where the corridor meets the court. Its flame confers with water and reaches a decision about light that the floor tiles admire. In a corner, a jar keeps cool for wine and makes the idea of the evening easier. Someone places cups on a tray and practices not clinking them. The practice succeeds and creates a feeling of riches that will never appear in a ledger. At last, under the aqueduct's last long span, a boy sets down a bucket and leans his back to warm stone. He is tired in a way that leads to sleep, not to resentment. A keeper, passing, taps the stone with the pole and hears the good hollow that means carrying, not cracking. He nods to the boy, who will forget the nod and remember the sound, nods back. The city holds them both without saying so. Pocket pictures for the road tonight. A chalk mark on a parapet saying only still, a bronze key turned a quarter, a fountain lip polished by jars, a feather trembling above a vent and combing a strigel's curve catching oil lacquer. Small moon, a plumber's knife tapping truth from a joint, the rounded curb of a well, a jar's shoulder in earth, a boy counting bays and losing count with dignity, a mason's invisible thumb print steam deciding where to be generouser. Vendor's figs, the tireless word of a spout, a keeper's pole leaning, a note at the edge of a page. Rome's water, Rome's heat, Rome's shade. None of it asks to be admired. All of it asks to be kept. Lamps, chords, scales, keys. Arches, the instruments do not change much, only the hands that pass them along. If sleep arrives, let it. The conduit will keep your place. The fourth part. The sea approaches Rome by learning geometry long before the city smells it. Waves have been taught to respect a pair of arms built out into the water, stone on stone, timber on poles, until the world curve of a coast becomes a shape that ships can trust. At the end of one arm, a tower keeps daylight in a cage of whitewash and night in a cup of oil. It does not persuade the horizon, it reminds it. Between the arms, water comes into sentences, short ones near the quay, long ones where pilots listen for depth with a lead line that tells the truth in wet syllables: sand, mud, weed. A pilot boat slides out with a rope, if offering a hand to a stranger who is already a friend. The rope carries polite tallow near the ring, so fibers and iron can begin the day in courtesy. The captain of the grain ship watches the harbour mouth widen into safety. He knows this hexagon of water was not born but reasoned. He looks at the wind, looks at the flags on the mole, looks at the gulls pretending to be accountants, and nods. Oars ship, sail comes down, and the harbour's small arms receive the day's first burden, bread that has not been bread yet. On the quay, rings keep their round exactly as yesterday. A man with a smear of tallow on his thumb checks the mooring bolt as if it were his own pulse. A crane wakes with a wooden cuff, capstan bars ready to accept the labour of 4 men who will walk in patient circles. Their feet write an old script on the boards. The block answers with a soft complaint that means I am working. The hook lowers, kisses a sling, rises with a sack of grain that shifts its mind once and then agrees. The first pallet touches the quay and decides to be land. The foreman of the hurrier waits with a rod and a face that has learned friendship with numbers. He lifts the modius, the wooden measure checks its rim with a thumbnail, the way his teacher did, sets it on a board, and nods to the first carrier. The sack opens under a cord that will open again tomorrow. Grain pours with the patience of dry weather. The board receives. The man levels with a flat of hand that does not lie, and the measure travels from table to tally. Chalk marks on a dark plank learn to be the city's memory with modest ambition. Inside the warehouses, the air is cool, less a temperature than a policy. Dully, a great earthen jars set deep in the floor keep oil and wine at a degree of calm that households cannot hire for themselves. Amphory stacking triangles that forgive small accidents. A clerk moves down the aisle with a tablet, writes what is, not what should be, and seals a cord with a face that has outlived 3 emperors without gossip. The seal sits like a small moon in wax, It says, "A hand you do not see has kept its promise." Farther down the quay, the Collegium of Shipowners treats lunch as if it were a vote. Bread, olives, a sardine that decided at dawn to be generous. A boy pours watered wine and watches the way wrists move when men think they are not speaking. An older man tells a story about a storm that never quite happened, and everybody believes him because he stops before the storm would need an adjective. On a shelf behind them, a line of lead-sounding weights shines from handling 1 for sand, 1 for mud, 1 with tallow, for picking up secrets from the bottom. Tools with manners. The inspector arrives with a scale in a box that never loses its temper. He sets the beam, lays the small stones, and admires how the air decides to be even. A sack is tested, found honest, and resealed with the same knot that will open before it argues. He walks to a crane, checks the rope where it rides the sheave, rubs a bit of tallow between finger and thumb, and leaves the rope better than he found it. He speaks to no one, because no one requires language to understand what has just been improved. From the sea, another ship. From the ship, another gangplank. From the plank, feet with stories. A sailor carries a coil that will become a line, that will become a conversation between wood and stone all afternoon. He drops the coil near a ring, and it falls into a circle with the elegance of practiced thought. A dockhand flicks a twisted bite, straightens it, and grins at the coil as if at a child now sitting properly. Discipline is the art of making politeness mechanical. In the weighing shed, 2 men argue softly with their shoulders. They lift a sack onto the platform. The beam considers, the small stones speak, and truth lands like a bird on the middle mark. The foreman scratches a line, draws a little curve for the street that will later receive a share, and says a name that is not the name of a man, but the name of a block of the city. Grain is not personal, it is civic affection given practical shoes. Beyond the sheds, a tangle of empty amphorae clinks its way toward a washard. Women rinse them with sea that has learned to be patient in the shade. They swish, tilt, set to drain on a rack that could be a fence if it wanted to. One woman taps an amphora neck with a fingernail, once for clean, twice for try again, and the yard becomes a tiny orchestra of small percussions that are exactly as strict as health requires. A child decides to count them and loses count with honor. The day drifts toward heat. On the mole a boy sits with a repair of net that looks like writing. He is not a poet, he is a citizen of rope. He splices a loose end into its family and tightens it with a fid smooth with inheritance. The knot sits, pleased to have been chosen correctly. A goal lands, declares a claim on a rough patch of stone, is ignored, and chooses a more philosophical bench farther along. The harbour decides to be a lecture in patience for anyone who is listening and a nap for anyone who is not. In the office of the port prefect, a map makes a promise without a single word. The hexagon of basins, the arms of the moles, the line of the river, the thin dark stripe of a canal, everything aligned to persuade grain into obedience. He lifts a stylus, notes a delay upriver from a sandbar that wishes to be a minor god, and sends a message to a tug crew that would rather be compared to saints than to oxen. The message travels under a loop that opens before it argues the loop likes its job. A team turns the capstan. The bar bites hands, hands bite back with lever. The crane's rope takes the lesson of the bar down into the block, up to the hook, and down again into a slow, precise descent. A pallet kisses stone. The men stop, reverse, walk backward, and the barge settles without complaint. On the quay, wedges of wood that prefer to be called by their names are set under the burden. The wedges do not mind being invisible, if they may be necessary. At midday, a breeze from sea teaches the basin to sparkle like coins discussing philosophy. A fishmonger lays out scales with a clean joke. A cooper rolls a barrel with a sideways step that his father would recognize and his son will understand without being told. The barrel clucks softly to itself, agreeing that staves and hoops can keep their promises if weather will consent to be a partner. A rope dealer shakes a length with both hands and pronounces it fit to be argued with later. He coils it into a circle the size of intention. Across the town, carts receive grain as if it were a vote. A public agent checks a tally stick against a tablet and sends a load along a street that will not gossip about where it went. A boy on the back of the cart presses a palm into the top of the sack to feel the city's hunger as a pressure that can be answered. He imagines bread and does not over-imagine it. The cart creaks away. The street, pleased to be useful, accepts the burden and keeps its geometry. In a shaded corner of the horror, a pot of pitch warms to teach staves not to talk to rain. The cooper dips a brush, draws a line along a seam, and turns the barrel with a foot on a peg in the floor, a dance that saves arguments for higher chords. He taps each hoop with a mallet that has no illusions about thunder. The barrel's note climbs and then decides to be sufficient. He nods once. Elsewhere in the aisle, a clerk gives a chord a small, thoughtful tug and smiles when the knot tells him it will open when asked and not before. Trust is a habit, not a mood. A pilot returns to the tower and wipes a lens that prefers to be thought of as a promise rather than a shining thing. He trims the wick, empties a cup of last night's ash into a bean that has seen more dawns than visitors. He checks the oil with a dipstick that is the only tyrant allowed on this platform. He writes a short note for the evening keeper. Wind fair, one sandbar cranky. Rope on east ring needs a favor. Gulls in a mood. He leaves the page on a nail that understands memory. By late afternoon, the tide gives advice and the harbour takes it. A tug crew answers the earlier message by leading a stubborn hull along the canal that pretends to be a river's little brother. They pull, talk to the current, and joke about saints who were probably never introduced to mud. The boat slides into the basin like a guest persuaded, not compelled, and a child on the quay claps once and looks around to see if applause is allowed. No one forbids it. The harbour is old enough to accept small compliments without blushing. Back upriver, at the Tiber stairs, bread that was imagined in the morning has been persuaded into form. A public official with a stamp delivers loaves in a basket that tells hands where to be. The stamp comes down, an impression that does not taste like anything, but does taste like fairness to the tongue of rumour. A woman takes a loaf and says a word to the official that the official will not remember because he hears so many, and because he's trying to become the sort of person who does not hoard gratitude. He is doing well. When shadows lengthen on the moles, the air gathers into long thoughts. A sailor, off duty, attends to a rope because goodness should fill the gap between tasks. He lays short splices with night-ready hands and leaves a line better than he found it. The line knows it and sleeps well on the pin. A child, returning with a jar of water, stops at the ring in the quay and thinks, the city is held by circles in stone. She is not wrong. If sleep arrives, let it. The sea will keep counting the city, will keep measuring the lamp, will keep everything small and exact. Pocket pictures for the hand that closes the door. A lead-lined whispering sand back to a wrist, a ring shining, where tallow taught it to be kind, a modious rim agreeing with the thumbnail chalk marks, like tame weather a seal's face in. A small round moon capstan bars, bitten by hands, wedges under a burden doing work. Nobody sees amphora necks on a rack listening to taps, a fid smoothing a splice, a tower wick trimmed to reason, a tally stick speaking softly to her. Tablet a stamp approving bread, a rope sleeping tidy, a child's palm on cool stone where circles agree. The empire eats because water is geometry and rope is manners. Lamps, chords, scales, keys, arches, the instruments play the same song here as on the road and in the baths. If sleep arrives, let it. The harbour keeps your place. The fifth part. Bread begins as wind that is not yet persuaded. Out in the plain, beyond the city's last milestone, barley bows and wheat stands, the difference is a conversation between stem and sun. A farmer tests a head between thumb and tooth, nods to the sky that always hears, and calls the day ready. Sickles moon-shaped and small enough to be on a star lifted from a peg, where they have slept all winter. Each blade has been kissed with stone until it learned to be useful without drama. Hands take rows in order, the field accepts departure in neat phrases. At the edge of the stubble, sheaves abound with their own straw. A girl ties knots that will open before they argue. She laughs because knots attend to laughter as well as to load. The bundles stand on their cut heels to dry. Stooks like short sermons. A boy drives into stakes for a field shelter, stretches a rope, and throws a cloth over it. Shade is given grammar with very little Latin. Under the cloth a water jar rests, shoulder deep in earth, and misunderstands heat on purpose. On the threshing floor, the year changes voice. A circle of hard clay, swept until it is as proud as a table, hosts the dance of separation. An ox walks with a comb any priest would envy, behind him a sled of boards, underset with stone teeth, troubles the compact with a patient quarrel. Straw lifts, kernels learn liberty, and dust writes daylight. A woman shakes a riddle sieve, her wrist speaking the old, persuasive language. The farmer watches wind. When afternoon finds its steadiness, he and a boy raise forks and let the winnowing do what only winnowing can. Take the light away and leave the useful behind. The modius, that square-shouldered measure that is law masquerading as wood, returns. Its rim is checked with a thumbnail that has learned honesty by habit. Grain flows in a hush that feels like fairness practiced aloud. The counts walk across a tally stick cuts shallow and deep, paired and respectful, and the stick returns to its pouch under a cord knotted to open. No one makes a speech about this. That is one way harvest stays gentle. At the villa's olive press, summer has prepared an answer for winter. A beam weighted with stones lowers its considered opinion onto mats of crushed fruit. Oil becomes a ribbon under the lip and waits in a clay bowl. A boy skims leaf and pride with a strip of linen, folds the cloth carefully, and lays it where it will dry without learning dust. The press keeps its slow counsel. The day will not hurry. The oil refuses to be offended by this. In a mill house by a stream that would rather talk than work, water is given a task that suits both. A wooden wheel dips its paddles into the argument and comes back convinced. Shafts carry persuasion inward to a pair of stones bed below and runner above cut with furrows, like good advice. Grain enters at the eye and exits as the possibility of bread. The miller listens the way a physician listens, by sound, by feel, by the small tremor that reveals ambition or regret. He opens the damsel an inch, then closes it half. The song of stone returns to its proper key. The miller's wife tests flour between finger and lip. Fine, she says, and nobody argues. She ties off a sack with 2 turns and a thought, presses a little seal into a pellet of wax at the knot, and hangs it by a hook to keep mice from discussing its future. A boy sweeps up the bran that escaped good advice and takes it to a pen where pigs keep the calendar of appetite. Nothing in this house expects applause, everything expects return. When the road brings grain homeward, the bakers wake their own science. In a courtyard oven, a fire that began with patience becomes a chamber that keeps it. The baker, who can read heat by color, the way sailors read weather by smell, sweeps the hearth with a wet rag tied to a pole. He presses dough with the heel of a hand into a confidence that will not be betrayed by flame. A starter jar, the city's quietest genius, has been kept alive 4 years by water and flour and the belief that tomorrow exists. He folds it into new dough until the old teaches the young, and no one can tell the difference anymore. He marks time by a finger pressed to a rising loaf. When the dent recovers like a thoughtful answer, he loads the peel. The loaves enter with a practiced glide and settle without complaint. Heat speaks in a voice the baker trusts. He closes the door with a plank that has learned to be door only when required. In the corner, a small stamp carved with a street sign waits to tell distribution who is owed what. It leaves its face lightly, and the city will taste fairness that night without noticing it tasted anything but bread. At a public bakery, the rhythm is a little louder and the manners just as careful. Teams lift sacks from a cart where a tally stick meets a tablet and both agree to be friends. Water in a trough welcomes flour. In small seasons, a paddle teaches them to live together. A worker oils his hands with a finger dipped in olive to persuade dough not to argue with skin. He weighs lumps on a scale, whose bean knows no flattery, sets them aside in rows that will become streets. In the corner, a boy scrubs a long-handled peel with sand until it feels like an instrument, not a board. He looks forward to the first burn on his forearm, an apprentice's useless scar, and usefully private pride. Near a river, a donkey mill turns, because wind is a musician that will not always play with you. While donkeys are practical friends, the animal walks a small world. The world says, "Thank you," by not growing any larger. The miller coaxes the harness with kindness that sounds like weather. Stones turn grain becomes news, sacks become promises with mouths. He chalks a mark on a post for a load completed, and another for one he forgave. Because the world is sometimes smaller than hunger, chalk knows the value of mercy better than ink. On the edge of town, a granary door opens on timber pins that remember seasons better than people do. Inside, coolness rehearses prudence. Sacks in ranks, the air tasting a little like patience and a little like straw. A clerk notes a number, then a second number, then the quick little curve that means all is as it ought to be. He does not write hopes down, hopes resent numerals. He just writes what a man can carry without lying. The cord is sealed with a small face that has lived longer than many names. The calendar turns its slow card. In the vineyards, green becomes shadow, becomes sugar in the gardens. A rill mutters to a row of leeks in a shed. A clay lamp is refilled from a small jar that has never been empty or full, but prefers the honest middle. In the hills, shepherds count as they always count, eyes, not mouths. Wool grows without speeches. At the river stairs, barges ride a little higher today than yesterday, because bread left the city in the morning and will return in the evening slightly altered and much improved. Rome's table is large, but it sits low to the ground. People eat standing, sitting, leaning, arguing gently with salt. In a crowded alley, a woman tears a loaf and hands a piece to a child who will remember the way a crust sings when torn. In a villa court, a household sits and tastes the way oil argues softly with bread and then surrenders. In a barracks, a soldier bites and declares the bread sufficient for the distance he owes himself. The city breathes out and breathes in, grain keeps the beat. If sleep arrives, let it. The mill sings without you, the oven remembers its heat knots will open in the morning. Your place at the table is kept by routines that like you better when you aren't worrying them. Pocket pictures to lay on the pillow. A sickle dreaming moonside down on a peg stooks, leaning like short sermons, the dust of threshing writing lighter fork releasing grain into afternoon wind, a modious room agreeing with her. Thumbnail tally stick cuts deep and shallow sharing a pouch a beam, and weights persuading olives into ribbon millstones, singing their measured song, a seal pellet cooling on a not a starter jar alive, the way cities are aliver. Peel sliding quietly, a stamp's face on a warm loaf, a donkey choosing patience over philosophy, a granary's cool breath, where numbers prefer understatement. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches and stones that turn, wheels that carry, knots that yield, small instruments, vast order. The empire eats politely and sleeps more easily because of it. The sixth part. A city sleeps best when doors understand their work. At first light, a key turns once in a bronze mouth, and the bolt withdraws with the small dignity of a thing used properly. In a modest house off a side street, a threshold stone accepts bare feet that remember where call lives. The lamp at the corner has learned the lesson of short wicks and clean oil. A woman trims it with a nail she keeps for that purpose and sets the flame low to let morning have the room. In the atrium, the square of sky above the basin is pale enough to be believed. A jar breathes in the night air that gathered under the tiles and settles back down to the shadow where jars prefer to think. A broom speaks to the floor the way an old friend speaks, with knowledge, without apology. The day begins at ground level and works upward. In the tablinum, a small chest holds the house's papers, wax tablets with lines scratched in them. Disc roads, a cord ties them and opens before it argues. A seal sits by the cord because trust is not a mood. The head of the household lifts the lid, checks a list written yesterday, and a hand that left space for today's corrections, and takes the stylus in an attitude of patience. Errands first, opinions later. Across the lane, the stairs of an insulae carry a different kind of mourning. Would that nose many feet size it small, honest complaint, Someone comes down with a pail, and the rope on the handle makes no speech about frugality. It simply does its work. Neighbors at the landing exchange a nod that recognizes the shared custody of sleep. A child tries his letters on a wax tablet with a stylus whose blunt end is as important as the sharp. Mistakes, smoothed and re-smoothed, are how a city learns to speak silently to itself. In a kitchen, in no larger than a promise, a cook lifts the lid from an earthen pot. Yesterday's broth dreams in the flavor of today's greens. A pinch of salt becomes a conversation with memory. She grinds a little more cumin in a mortar whose rim is polished where generations held on. The pestle taps, and the room accepts this as music. Bread that came stamped from the public oven is cut, dipped, made honest. A boy brings in a jug from the cool corner where clay learns to sweat. He adjusts his grip just before it would have been necessary and looks pleased with the future. At a street shrine on the corner, a small cupboard of devotion to lamps wait for the hand that keeps them. A baker's assistant pauses, touches the shelf with 2 fingers the way his father taught him, and checks the oil. He pours a little, cleans a spout, and the city notices with its peripheral mind. Not pious, exactly careful. From a window above, a curtain moves just enough to admit mourning and decline drama. A bird chooses the bronze beak of a water spout for a pulpit and says nothing worth reporting. The day opens its pockets. A rope across a small shop's doorway lifts to let a board be set on trestles. A counter is a ceremony of 2 gestures. A cobbler takes a leather strip. He draws a line with chalk on a sole that has learned which foot it prefers and pricks holes with an awl that gleams where fingers have taught it to shine. Stitch by stitch, the city earns a quieter afternoon. The shop's door latch is a loop that can be lifted with a forefinger. It will open before it argues. At the house with the atrium, a girl draws water from the impluvium into a basin for washing figs. She moves slowly because her mother moves slowly. The lesson fits her hands. A little bronze ladle with a loop sits near the basin. Its handle knows what it is for without language. On the household altar, to clay figures the small gods of the housekeeper calm that would not be improved by attention. The head of the household places a pinch of meal and a drop of wine and makes no speech. A lamp on the shelf keeps its circle of patience. Down the street, sunlight remembers the mosaic floor or a public room and restates it. Small stones, set in lime, teach eyes to enjoy order. When a tile is missing, it is a question mark for hands. A mason arrives with a satchel of cut tesserae and a wooden float, weights the gap, lays a butter of lime, and sets each stone until the question mark becomes grammar again. He wipes the surface with a damp cloth run over a stick and stands the floor, says thank you by becoming what it was with the dignity of repair. Laundry hangs from a line that has negotiated with 2 window grills for years. Cloth talks with wind in syllables too simple to need translation. A woman shakes a tunic, wants to remind it to be a garment and not a flag. A neighbor answers with a similar shake. Agreement by echo, one of the city's quiet practices. Below, a peddler passes with a tray of small lamps. The wicks are new and promising. He carries a repairs pot for cracked handles slip and a pinch of hope, and he knows which cracks are worth the trouble. He sells 1, fixes 2, and earns the right to walk without hurry. At noon, a sundial on a wall says exactly what the street already feels. The shadow lays a firm line across a mark scratched with care. The line moves as if reluctant and at the proper pace. A boy tries to cover it with his hand and laughs at the failure, which is the point. In a courtyard, a loom works. A shuttle passes hand to hand. A warp accepts the weft as a friend who talks too much but is useful. The weaver leans back, rolls his shoulders, and picks lint from a thread with the tenderness given to things that keep people from humiliation. A door knocker that prefers not to be called is used gently. A visitor waits, counts 1, 2, 3, and the door opens. Visiting is a craft. The host places a stool where the visitor will not feel the sun, where it should not be felt. He pours watered wine. The water knows how to be peace. The wine knows how to be agreed with. They discuss timbers and tiles. Not war tile men and timber men get work done while war instructs nobody at the scale of rooms. They gossip exactly enough to stay human and not enough to become their own enemies. A small plate of olives arrives on a board that remembers other afternoons and says nothing unkind about them. In the afternoon heat, the city seeks shade and produces it scientifically. Awnings stretch between posts and facades along a street that is thinking about sleep. The ropes that haul them are knotted to know the difference between a gust and the law. A boy assigned to the awnings unwinds a turn, checks a cleat, nudges a pulley wheel with a forefinger, and lets the canvas learn its new position. His teacher watches from a doorway and nods once the nod knows more grammar than many books. Later, a scribe in a portico sharpens a reed and opens a small lamp that will not be lit until the sky consents. He warms wax with breath and smooths it with the blunt end of his tool, leveling old sentences to make room for better ones. A client arrives to dictate a letter that asks for consideration in a matter concerning a boundary stone. The scribe writes as if the letters had lives of their own and needed to be coaxed, not forced. The client signs with a seal that shows a dolphin and a palm. The wax accepts the image without pride. Night approaches without argument. Doors receive their bars wooden. Iron shod, each understands its job. A watchman passes, tapping a staff just enough to remind the hour and not enough to frighten it. In an upper room, an old woman lights the lamps, one for work, one for not work. She threads a needle and hems a napkin that will be admired for being invisible. In a yard, a boy winds a cord around a peg to keep tomorrow's goat from arguing with the neighbor's rosemary. The stars come like respectful visitors who leave on time. If sleep arrives, let it. Locks will remember lamps, will wind themselves. The city will hold your place the way a patient hand holds a page. Pocket pictures for the threshold of dreams. A key turning once a lamp wick trimmed short and honest, the basin square of sky, a wax tablet smooth on one side and written on the other, a luplatch that lives like a habit, a fig washed in impluvium water, a mosaic tessera set into wet lime, a sundial's shadow firm but not in a hurry, awning ropes riding pulleys with good manners, a reed stylus warm in breath, a seal face soft in wax, a bar laid across a door that has nothing to prove. A city is a chorus of modest instruments, lamps, chords, scales, keys, arches. Rooms repeat their quiet, sweep, set, pour, share, close. Streets repeat theirs, nod, lift, shade, pass, return. None of it demands witness, all of it works better when you aren't watching. If sleep arrives, let it. Rome will keep your place. The seventh part. Trust is not an idea, it is a kit on a table. At first light in the forum's shadow, a cloth is shaken over a plank, and instruments find their places, a balance whose beam prefers level to fame, a nest of weights in bronze, a set of small measures for oil and grain with rims that refuse flattery, a box for cords, a pot of wax, a pair of seals, a knife with a blunt back for honesty. The merchant who lays them out counts by touching each once. The cloth lies flat, the day begins as a promise not to hurry. Stalls open like eyelids. A fishmonger lays reeds under his catch so that water can choose how to leave. A cheesemonger arranges wheels in a half moon that understands appetite. A spice seller pinches dust between two clean fingernails and lets it fall back into its family. In the passageways between tables, a woman tries the weight of an orange and sets it down as if deciding a small case. A child watches a money changer break a large coin into smaller truths with a scale and a nod. Copper speaks loudly, silver speaks softly, gold prefers to write notes. There is law nearby, but it does not shout. Under a portico, a scribe ties his wax tablets with a cord that will open before it argues. Clients bring their short storms, the measure of a wall, the promise of a delivery, the boundary between a tree and a path, and the scribe teaches the storm to walk. He writes names that cannot be read from the street. He presses a seal that can be felt from a pocket. A witness clears his throat, not to speak, but to make listening official. Ink dries while bread warms in nearby hands. Justice here takes the temperature of kitchens, not of punishments. Weights arrive for inspection, the way children arrive for school, willing enough if you make it a habit. In a small office, the keeper of standards lifts each bronze weight and matches it against a master that has listened to emperors and outlived them. He wipes a rim with a cloth that removes yesterday without scolding it. When a weight is honest, he scratches a tiny mark where only another keeper would look. When it is tired, he sends it to be filed and trued and made a citizen again. His tools are humble, his face is a coin that has kept its own image through many pouches. The moneyers work in a room that smells of fire tamed by math. On one bench, blank small, dull circles cool on a tray like moons, not yet convinced. On another, a die waits with a picture carved backward in steel, a face that will be pressed forward into time. A worker sets a blank on the little anvil, places the die, lifts a hammer that weighs only as much as agreement, and strikes once. The sound is convincing. The coin leaves the bench as if seat-belted into a future, where it will change hands 100 times without explaining itself. Nearby, an older man tests a sample on the scale. Truth sits in the middle and closes its eyes. At the edge of the market, a guild hall shelters the vocabularies of craft. The baker's wall shows peels and molds. The rope maker's bench keeps a twist between two posts. Like a small river, the cooper's draw knife faces a shaving horse that has learned the conversation between push and pull. A new member is shown where the oil is kept for preventing squeaks, where the knot is written down that does not slip, where the scrap wood goes, that is too short for planks and too good for fire. He nods as men nod when they agree to be patient together. A cup of watered wine is pushed his way. It tastes like joining. The census clerk set up under shade with a calendar that does not forgive arithmetic but allows for rain. Names, ages, households, trades lines marching onto wooden tablets that will be unstrung, smoothed, unstrung again as neighborhoods change their mind about where to put babies and prunes. A clerk asks a question as if measuring a window, gently, carefully, twice. A woman answers as if opening a door, carefully, gently, once. The stylus moves a cord, ties the pile, a seal touches the loop and gives it confidence. Nothing here is urgent, everything here matters. At a street corner, a pair of ushers in clean tunics prevent the market from becoming a river that forgets its banks. They shift a barrow a hand's width to the left, ask a hawker to sing from a lower hill, and nod a cart along with two fingers and a look more useful than any sentence. Behind them a public crier reads a notice about weights and the season for certain goods, not a threat, a reminder. He names the street, he names the fountain, he names 3 days when inspectors will be kind and a 4th when they will not need to be. The sound enters doors and minds and causes no trouble. On a threshold near the forum, a notary sits with a box that holds a small universe, folded papers, little clay pellets, strings, a knife, a bit of charcoal. 2 seals, one used often, one used for occasions. A mason arrives to sign a promise about a wall that will have a window in it exactly large enough for a breeze and not large enough for regret. The notary reads back what was said in a tone that makes language into furniture. You can sit on it, it will hold. The mason presses his mark, the clay remembers him without making him famous. Noon tempers ambition. Shade gathers under awnings stretched on ropes that know the difference between gusts and gossip. A scale beam glows and does not bend a measure cup tips, and then rights itself without applause. A barber snips hair without making a metaphor about it. 2 women examine a length of cloth, rubbing the weft between finger and thumb until it tells them if it will hold a pleat or a winter. The cloth answers, coin passes and knot ties a parcel. The street remains equal to itself. In the tabularium, the city's archive, where air learns to walk slowly, bundles of records sleep behind doors that enjoy being opened exactly as far as they must. A keeper with steps soft as well kept leather checks each shelf with a finger for dust and with an eye for order. He moves a bundle one space where it belongs more truly, notes the move with a small mark that will be understood in winter and in the next century, and ties a loop again that will open before it argues. When he leaves, the room breathes correctly, having been listened to. Afternoon courts the fountains. A beer returns to a merchant with a jug and a question. The merchant answers with a weight and a measure. and the patience of someone who believes a transaction is a rehearsal for evening civility. A coin is examined against a smooth stone. The silver behaves to knuckles, tap the measures, rim the rim answers, the jug is filled, the cord is tied, the seal is impressed, with a face familiar to both. They nod. A child pretends the fountains overflow, is a tiny river, with a bridge the bridge holds, which is a lesson good for bridges and 4 days. Away from the market buzz, at a small shrine to fortune, that collects more dust than prayers, a woman leaves a ribbon tied to a ring as if asking a door to open in the future at an unspecified hour. The ribbon's knot is neat. It will open before it argues. A passerby notices the color and thinks of a bowl he meant to repair and then forgets again. Memory in cities is a flock. It looks like a cloud. It travels by turnings and it settles where grain is. A pigeon chooses the shrine's sill and grants absolution to nobody. Evening begins with balances being put away. The money changer counts coins by sound more than by sight, listens for the note that means alloy, and hears none. He smiles to himself without it being a story. The cheesemonger wraps his last wedge, and a leaf the size of a hand's shadow. The spice seller turns each weight face down on the cloth, as if asking them to sleep without dreams. The scribe smooths the last tablet with the blunt end of his reed, and ties the cord with his eyes closed. Habit can be this kind when practiced cleanly. If sleep arrives, let it. Contracts will lie quietly, seals will keep their faces weights, will dream in bronze of being lifted in the morning by careful hands. Pocket pictures to store behind the eyelids, a balance beam finding level and keeping it a nested set of weights with tiny marks. Only a keeper knows a moneyer's die raised from steel like memory, from stone a cord looped through. Tablet and tied in a knot that understands tomorrow, a gilt bench with a draw knife waiting, a census tablet smoothed and written again, an usher's 2-finger courtesy at a turning, a notary's knife turning a pellet of clay into a promise, a measure rim checked by a thumbnail, the slow air of the archive, a ribbon on a shrine ring, a spice weight turned face down to rest. Rome's civility is not an accident, it is a choreography of tools that never needed to be beautiful to be right. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches, the instruments of night are the instruments of day measured softly. If sleep arrives, let it. The city signs its name and keeps your place. The 8th part. A road is a sentence with good punctuation. At first light, on a low ridge beyond the city walls, 2 surveyors lift a Groma cross of arms, plumb lines hanging like patient thoughts, and let the lines decide what is straight today. One man fixes his eye on the thread, the other marks the ground with a stake whose shadow agrees. Between stakes, a cord is pulled until it sings quietly. The crew smiles at a tune they know. A boy sprinkles dry lime along the intended course, and the earth receives handwriting it will keep for centuries without needing to be read. Spades open the first trench along both sides, narrow and exact ditches that will ask rain to travel politely. Between them rises the adger, the lifted bed that will let water think it has won even when it has not. Layers begin, the rough stones that do not mind being unseen, the finer stones that negotiate, the gravel that remembers rivers finely, the surface paving where the budget is proud, well-rolled gravel where the money has other plans. A mason kneels with a straight edge and a small mind for stubbornness. He taps a stone until it accepts the company of its neighbors. He listens as if for a hinge clicking shut. At the first curve, the foreman teaches camber, the gentle crown that tells rain the shortest interesting story downhill. He eyes the ditch, measures a span with the old trick of thumb against the handle, and nods. A culvert is set, small arch of brick, mouth shaped like a careful promise and packed with earth, so it can forget its own importance and perform it. Where the road meets a hollow, a causeway learns to float on stone. Where it meets a stream, a bridge begins its education. Cutwaters pointing upstream, piers that speak fluent flood, parapets wide enough for a hand and a thought. A milestone is rolled from the cutting yard and urged into its hole with levers that consider persuasion more elegant than force. No names need be legible to make distance behave. Men rub the surface with sand until it loses the arrogance of newness. the stone learns to be counted, and to count itself unoffended. Beside it a ditch marker is planted, humble post, charred against rot. A boy runs a palm along the grain and leaves a print that will be gone by the next rain. He thinks of it later and smiles without remembering why. At midday, a way station mutatio for horses opens like a throat clearing. The corral gate swings on iron that knows grease. A stableman checks collars, keepsers, cinches, and the opinions of hooves. He draws water from a trough long enough to be a lane. A horse lowers its head and writes little circles in the surface with breath. A farrier warms a sliver of iron, checks it against a hoof with gentlemanly fingers, and decides today is a day for fitting, not for nails. He opens a feed bin, and the smell is a small feast. A kitten observes the official mice, who conduct themselves with proper caution. Next door, the Mancio posting house keeps the crafts of rest. A lamp smokes once, when trimmed, and then remembers manners. A bench by the door grants an audience to knees with long opinions. In the yard, a cart turns, its axle speaking a dialect of timbers, and grease the carter leans and answers with a rag. A cook pours water into a pot and teaches barley to stop pretending it is grain and become food. On a wall, a painted board offers distances to the next river crossing and the next, drawn as lines, not words. Travelers read it with the side of the eye that understands maps or kindness. The state post cursus publicus keeps a smaller room as an act of discipline. Inside, a leather sack waits on a peg, sealed with clay pellets that wear faces. A dispatch rider arrives, shows a passport to bronze leaves hinged like a small door, strings through holes. The seal wearer's signature would be if the world were made of ink, and the clerk who has given his youth to carefulness nods once. The sack seals are inspected, found to be the ones they were this morning, and replaced with others that will mean evening. The rider drinks, says little, and pulls the stirrup leather absent-mindedly, the way professionals reconcile with ours. After the heat, the road goes on, choosing shade where cypresses are generous, choosing height where hills agree. It crosses a marsh on a causeway, whose side drains carry frogs' commentary with aplomb. It eases through stone cuttings, where chisels taught rock to behave. It touches a ridge, where a milepost and the sky conspire to reset a man's appetite for distance. A shepherd with a flock learns to step off the crown for carts that hum with the shallow growl of good wheels. Greetings are brief, because good roads shorten speech as well as travel. Toward afternoon, a patrol of road workers inspects yesterday's ditches. They carry shovels tipped like syllables and a rake that can write in gravel. A puddle that wanted to be a pond is dissuaded with a few gestures. A wheel track deepens and is filled before it becomes a policy. They lift a stone, place it higher, tamp it with a rammer that teaches gravity to be useful. One man chips a little at a parapet nick and stops when the edge is right again. He knows where enough lies. They scratch a mark on a tally board and tie it with a loop that opens before it argues. The road thanks them by being uninteresting. Down the slope, a village green becomes the kind of market that wakes only on certain days. A wheelwright tightens a hoop with heat and listens for the note that means the wood is pleased. A rope seller shows a traveller how to set a hitch that will not jam in rain. A woman at a stall sells felt pads for saddles and the mercy that comes with them. The way station's boy brings out a broom and escorts dust to the ditch with courtesy. The dust does not complain it has lost more important arguments. Evening sees a courier change horses under a lintel polished by other departures. The stableman swings the new mount's head gently, considers the wind, and gives one extra notch on the girth, because hills have opinions after sunset. The rider swings up and gives the kind of nod that means both gratitude and time. He touches his dispatch sack, if to remind it of their agreement. The horses hooves translate road into pulse. The lamps along the station yard decide to be planets. The rider disappears into the long sentence of stone and ditch and quiet, measured speed. If sleep arrives, let it. Milestones will keep count, culverts will keep council posts, will keep their seals wide awake, so you do not have to be. Pocket pictures to lay beside the lamp. A gromer's crossed arms, with threads level in a small morning accord pulled until it sings. A culvert mouth, shaped like a promise, a cambered crown shedding rain, a mannered shrugger. Milestone rubbed until it forgot to be proud, a stable trough with circles of horse breath, a bronze-hinged passport opening like a door, a leather dispatch sack with clay seals, calling a wheelwrights who glowing to the correct colour, a ditch rake writing a brief lesson in gravel, a causeway quieting a marsh, a bridge's cutwater holding a thought steady in a stream, stones and ditches, cords and seals, wheels and lamps, the small exact tools by which distance forgets how to be a warning and becomes an appointment. If sleep arrives, let it. The road will keep your place. The ninth part. Water is a citizen when invited correctly. At dawn above the city, a spring remembers its way through rock, clear and without speeches. Men arrive with tools that look like patience-given handles. They set a wooden trough to catch the flow and test a cup against light. Then they lay out a line with the corrobates, a long level on stout legs. Water in a shallow channel, proving what the eye wants to guess. A thread is stretched, a stake is set, a notch is cut. The gradient is not a rumour. It is a courtesy. The hill extends to the town, where ridge allows. Archers learn to walk 1 foot, then another, carrying a channel like a thought across distance. The speakers, the covered conduit, is lined with smooth red mortar that forgives small errors and does not forgive neglect. At intervals, square mouths open to sky inspection shafts, where a man can descend with a lamp and a scraper and remove yesterday before it can teach algae ambition. Elsewhere, the line dips into a valley and returns via a pressure pipe. Bronze collars holding lead lengths that would prefer not to be hurried. Air is bled with a whistle and a practiced wrist. The Aquarius, keeper of water, moves along the work without hurry, touching things more than naming them. Close to the walls, the aqueduct lowers its head into a chamber with 3 mouths, a castellum divisorium where water rests enough to consider fairness. 3 takeoffs sit with their bronze stopcocks, half turned like good listeners. A scribe in a short cloak notes the opening chosen, the hour, the remark about a fountain's mood. He moves a peg on a board, this much to bouts, this much to fountains, this much to streets, and lifts a small door with a hook when the city asks. Pipes hum like contented bees behind plaster. No one claps. Flow happens because it is asked properly. In a square the city calls by a name it does not need to say out loud. A fountain receives. Stone lips soften the sound. A bronze spout remembers swans without insisting on one. Children bring amphorae small enough for their wrists. The handles teach them patience. A woman lets a dipper float for a count of 3 because waiting is a kind of hygiene. A bucket rubs the curb smooth in the shape of mornings. Downstream, runnels conduct the extra into thirsty trees that envy no one. The street thanks the fountain with shade. Farther along, a bathhouse wakes, as if an orchestra were tuning without pride. In the yard, wood arrives and is stacked by length and dryness. A man at the Profernium, the fire mouth feeds flame with an intelligence older than recipe. Under the floors, a grid of short pillars pile holds up a second skin of tiles. Heat walks among those little columns like a polite official who knows everybody's name. On the walls, hollow tiles with nipples tegale mamate make a passage for warmth to climb without argument. The stoker listens for the voice of the coldarium, the more thoughtful breath of the tepidarium, the honesty of the frigidarium where water, admitting no bribe, stays itself. Attendants move like grammar through sentences. One sweeps a mosaic dry where other feet will not notice the favor. Another checks a bronze tap and oils a hinge so that sound will be a whisper. A third heats oil in a shallow pan, just enough to teach viscosity manners. On a shelf, Strigel's weight curve scrapers that prefer clean to fancy. Hooks receive tunic sandals, find their neighbors' benches, keep knees from talking politics. Men arrive with a day's dust and leave it on the tiles in a pattern that looks like relief maps of farms. In the apodaterium, the changing room, a boy posts himself by a basket and learns ownership as in a series of small promises. He ties a cord through handles, slips a clay tag on the loop, and presses the house mark with a seal no wider than a thumb. The tag calls. The knot is snug, and the day's possessions feel seen. The boy does not think of theft. When he does this, he thinks of evening. and the taste of bread after a shift, and the way oil smells when poured from a cold lamp. A man enters the warm room and does not hurry, because the heat will not be commanded. He sits, stands, breathes, lets the body remember that it is a vessel built for water. A friend arrives and makes a joke with no sharp corners. They agree to disagree about the merits of yesterday's fish and the temperament of a mule neither has met. A servant brings warm oil in a small jug. The man rubs it into his arms with a care more like prayer than health. He stands again, steps into the hotter room, and every whirring he did not name falls off him, and a mistaken idea. At the basin, the colour of useful thought, a slave pours water over a shoulder, and the day introduces itself to the drain. The strigil comes next, edge firm, hand kinder than the edge drawing oil, and dust and bad opinions down the arm, across the ribs, behind the knee. The man does not look younger. When he is done, he looks accurately dated and in agreement. He rinses, nods to the room, speaks a quiet word to the god, who excuses vanity when it serves cleanliness. He walks through a short breath of cool air to a bench and lets skin remember air as friend. In another corner, the women's hours proceed with equal dignity and slightly different jokes. Hair is put up, then let down, then put up properly. An older woman instructs a younger on the right amount of oil for elbows and the wrong amount for reputations. A child is taught to sit on the edge of a pool and not to kick until the first warning has been issued. Someone hums something that will never be written down and will be remembered for a week, then forgotten in favor of a better tune that is actually worse. The bath's pipe room is a gallery without visitors. A workman with a lamp for a crown walks among joints that could quarrel and asks them not to. He tightens a collar here, wipes a weeping joint there, leaves a string knotted below a slow drip so that water will confess and not sneak. He marks a bit of plaster with a coal line, and later a man with a trowel will come and make a forgetfulness where there was a mark. The workman touches the base of a bronze cock and thinks it is warmer than it should be. He notes this with the side of a finger and returns to the furnace to reconsider drafts. He does not say system, he says good. In the palestra, the exercise court, sand has opinions about sandals. To men throw a light ball but will not forgive scorn and will not reward ambition. A wrestler dusts his hands and decides for once not to wrestle. A youth runs a few lengths and remembers to turn his head at the corner because someone told him it was good for the neck. At the edge, a book sits closed. Its owner has chosen heat over Cicero for 1 hour and will forgive himself later. When steam has done what steam can do, coal speaks without raising its voice. The frigidarium keeps a square of water with a step that encourages decision rather than bravado. A man lowers himself to the neck if into a new sentence his skin argues, then remembers reason. He comes out and finds a towel that has learned to be rough and kind simultaneously. An attendant offers a splash from a smaller basin that has never seen soap. The man nods. His body is his friend again. Outside, the baths release citizens back to streets that will be kinder to them for having been relieved of their private weather. At a fountain, a pipe gives a confident thread of water into a cup, and the cup advises a mouth to slow down. The keeper of the castellan closes one stopcock a degree, opens another half, and the city's voices remain balanced. Households do not resent fountains. Fountains do not resent baths. Baths do not resent laundries. The Aquarius signs the day in a book that is mostly numbers and a few remarks written on their sides, like friendly fish. Evening puts gloss on the aqueduct arches. Swallows stitch the air with a thread nobody paid for. A boy balances along the low wall of the chamel's cover and is scolded by a mason who loves him more than the law does. The last scraping in the inspection shaft sings a small iron song. In the bath, lamps come up along a frieze of light. Oil is covered, brass is cooled, doors are lifted back onto hooks, and the building performs the trick of sleeping without becoming unattended. If sleep arrives, let it. Arches will remember load pipes, will remember slow pots, will remember when to become warm and when to resign. Your place is kept by water that was asked politely. pocket pictures to float behind the eyes, the corrobate straight water teaching kiln to behave the aqueduct's red mortar gloss under a square of sky, a pressure pipe shouldering across a dip, whistled free of air, the three-mouthed castellum with stopcocks at the angle called fairness, a fountain curb burnished by buckets, the profernium's low-mouth, a chessboard of pilave under a floor that hums nipple tiles climbing heat. Up a wall, a strigil's curve, a clay tag on a basket loop, a drain swallowing bad ideas, a towel hung on her, a peg carved by habit, a coal mark on plaster that will be forgiven by trowel swallows stitching dusk above an arch. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches and now channels, stopcocks, tiles and drains, the unglamorous orchestra that turns water into courtesy. If sleep arrives, let it. The aqueduct keeps your place. The 10th part. A harbour is a handshake taught to water. Before dawn, lamps along the mole cool from gold to amber, while a breeze crosses the basin with the manners of someone entering a quiet room. Mooring rings set in stone wait with the patience of iron ropes. Remember which way to coil when nobody is watching. At the breakwater's end a beacon lowers its flame for day, not out of fatigue, but to let daylight have the first word. Swell from the open sea reaches the wall, thinks better of opinions, and folds into small decisions. The first hole noses in past the mouth, a grain ship that has learned distance the way donkeys learn turns. Its stern carries a steering oar worn smooth by hands that spoke in short sentences for weeks. From the prow, a sailor tosses a messenger line thin as a thought over a ring thick a rope follows like agreement. On the quay, a man at a bollard turns the hawser twice and leaves it in a figure that can be understood at a glance. A capstan takes the strain with a low, useful music bars walk in a circle under shoulders that have practiced the same arguments many mornings without resentment. A crane waits nearby a wooden tower with a patient wheel inside. Ropes reeved through blocks that enjoy geometry, to men step into the treadwheel and begin to walk uphill inside a circle that never ends. The hook below rises with a politeness that prefers not to startle. A sling nestles under an amphora crate. The crate lifts, swings, and comes down onto the quay, where a scribe marks a tally stick with cuts that were agreed last winter and will be agreed next. Beside him, a boy touches a clay seal to a cord that has just met a mouth of wax. The seal calls into a face that has no enemies. Amphorae stand in ranks, shoulders white with kill dust subdued by sea air. A cooper tests each jar with a small tap. The sound says whole or unhappy. When a jar is doubtful, he rubs its neck with oil, presses a plug, and marks it on a wax tablet where numbers are few and friendly. An inspector lowers a dipstick through a mouth and lifts it slowly, so grain husks can think level is read by a thumbnail against old stain. Nothing here hurries, because grain knows how to punish haste. Dock hands move sacks along a timber causey to a weighing floor marked with circles the size of agreement. A beam scale finds level, a pebble weight kisses the pan, and then another, until both sides decide to be honest. The sack mouth is tied with a loop that will open before it argues. A pellet of clay receives today's seal and becomes a sentence that says, quietly, this is what it says it is. Carts wait with wheels that were greased last night. The axles smell faintly of tallow and foresight. Past the cranes, the pilasters of a warehouse cast shade wide enough to be gratitude. Horrier doors planked. Iron pins swing on hinges that have accepted oil as a religion. Inside, coolness rehearses prudence. Bins stand with stone cheeks planked partitions, are rubbed smooth by sacks that meant no harm. On a beam, a tally board hangs with a row of cords and tags, each tag carrying an impressed face, and a knot tied by a hand that learned from a hand. A guard with a short staff and a long memory leans. Where he can see both shadow and door, he adjusts a glove, not suspicion. In one corner, dolia great jars set into the floor to their shoulders hold oil and wine that travelled farther than most people will. Their rims are covered with boards weighted by stones the size of bread. A cellarer lifts a board, smells like a physician who likes his work, and nods. He makes a scratch low on the jar to embarrass thieves who dislike crouching. He will smooth it later with pride. On the far wall, A row of brooms, paddles, hooks, and scoops hangs like an alphabet of trust. A clerk from the Annona office arrives with calm on purpose. He carries a small chest with 3 compartments, wooden tablets, cords with tags, a purse that breathes quieter than money usually does. He sits at a table, takes a reed stylus, warms a tablet with his hand, and writes short names and shorter numbers. He does not need the year, he needs the morning. A baker's agent steps up, presents a stamped token from yesterday, and receives sacks that will be bread, and then not be bread by sunset. The clerk scratches a notch on a tally, and ties a loop. The rope ends confront each other like polite cousins, and agree to be a knot. By mid-morning, the basin has become choreography without applause. A lighter skims along with a single sail no bigger than Patience. A boy at the bow pushes away from stone with a padded pole, and knows exactly how much to regret it later. A cat judges fish from a respectful distance and refuses to be poetic. A woman sells felt pads for shoulders at the head of the gangway. Her inventory is a stack and a needle, and the understanding that pain negotiates better after lunch than before. At the far quay, a rope maker pays rent in tidiness. He twists strands along the lane chalked into 3 honest lines. The hook at the far end turns, the hooks at the near end answer, and fibre becomes argument resolved. He splices an eye that will sit on a ring for a season, and opens a tuck with a fid whose handle learned his palm. He tests the splice with a hard pull and a soft look. When asked the difference between a good rope and a story, he shrugs and says stories sometimes untwist. Near the mouth, a pilot boat rests low and ready. Pilots know the last word of wind inside a harbour better than priests know the first word of a prayer. One steps aboard a new arrival, passes the helmsman a thought with 2 fingers, and the great whole turns its opinions into compliance. In the channel, a pair of dolphins rehearse an old myth badly, and please everyone anyway. The beacon keeper trims a wick by daylight out of habit, because habit's built the harbour, and keep it when talent sleeps late. Carts roll out along a road that prefers weight to speeches. The drivers set their wheels on the crown so the ditches can go on minding sky. At a gatehouse, a clerk checks seals, names the street without saying it, and chalks a little mark on the cart rail that will be brushed off by afternoon. Children count cards until counting turns into stones. A man with a broom convinces grain dust to leave the quay and pursue a quieter career up in the warehouse rafters. Toward noon, a barge is poled alongside a granary door that opens onto the canal, a light mouth. Sacks pass in a slow belt of arms. The barge lowers a finger's width. The racks inside the horier accept weights as a musician accepts rest. On a hook by the door hangs a long-handled scoop carved from one piece. It measures without drama, pours without complaint, and returns to its nail, as if the nail had called it by name. The granary's cat licks a paw beside it and refuses to look impressed. In a corner yard, a public crane lowers a millstone rough from the cutter. Men wash grit from the furrows with hands that already know tomorrow's bread will taste less of sand. Because of this, the stone is lifted again and set onto a bed that has been waiting with patience and a little jealousy. The miller runs a finger along the pattern and smiles the small smile of craftsmen who have learned to be accurate without being praised for it. A visiting official looks as if he means to approve, then decides the miller's smile is sufficient paperwork. Afternoon light finds the painted sterns of river boats and forgets to move for a while. The basin's surface takes on the look of hammered metal cooled correctly. A boy climbs the short ladder to the beacon and is told to come down by a keeper who wants him alive longer than curiosity does. A sailor mends a tear in a sail with a needle not much smaller than Patience. He waxes the thread and says something kind to it. Thread remembers kindness. Sailcloth forgives more when wax is involved. A baker's cart returns from the city lighter than responsibility, but heavier with gratitude. The driver buys an orange with a coin that was a coin this morning and will be a story tomorrow. He gives a heel of bread to the cat that refuses to be impressed and fools no one. A woman fills small jars at a spout for oil that travelled farther than her grandmother's opinion. She wipes each mouth with a cloth that knows the difference between clean and perfect and chooses clean. A boy lowers a bucket into a freshwater cistern set by the quay and draws it up, surprised again that water can be cold in summer if stone is permitted to do arithmetic. By evening, the harbour ties up its thoughts. Ropes are laid in ovals, hooks are covered, cranes rest with their blocks lowered, so wind will not teach them to complain. The beacon keeper sets the night flame, small at first, then serious. The light leaves a measured path on the water for those who require a reason to rest. In the warehouse, a guard closes the bar across a door that does not think highly of drama. He tests a seal with a thumbnail, finds it properly bored, and walks the aisle once the cool air thanks him with indifference. If sleep arrives, let it. Rings will hold ropes, will remember grain, will keep its temper seals, will keep their faces lamps, will take the second watch happily. Pocket pictures to stack beside the lamp. A hawser figure laid honest on stone. A treadwell crane with men walking uphill inside a patient circle, a dipstick through an amphora mouth. Thumbnail reading yesterday's. Stainless steel pellet cooling on a not a horror doorway, breathing cool dahlia shoulders under boards, and stones, a rope splice tested by a pull, and a looker pilots to finger conversation at a helm. Scoop returning to its nail. A millstone furrow rinsed of grit, a beacon wick trimmed, even though the sun is awake, rings and coils. Bars and hooks, quiet grammar, large appetite. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches and now rings, cranes, seals and bins. The harbour's small instruments, turning sea into supper with no need to raise its voice. If sleep arrives, let it. The key will keep your place. The 11th part. A farm is a clock with hands of earth and weather. Before the sun has opinions, the villa rustica breathes in a long, even rhythm. A gate eased off its night bar, a courtyard swept where yesterday's straw arranged itself politely. A cistern rope that knows the weight of morning. In the byre, oxen turn their slow heads as if consulting a calendar written on the inside of their ribs. A boy runs a hand down a yoke polished to the colour of honest effort and checks the leather with a tug that means he has learned from sore shoulders, not his own. Along the boundary, the steward walks with a bundle of short rods and a mind like a plumb line. He stops at a cornerstone peeping from grass, rubs lichen off with his sleeve, and nods to the inscription. He cannot quite read, because the light is not trying to be helpful yet. He sets to rods as a sight, lifts a third, and finds straight with the impatience of someone who has made peace with patience. At the ditch, he kicks loose a bit of silt and the water accepts correction. A mark goes onto a wax tablet to small scratches. A loop of cord through the hinge, and the day now owns its first sentence. In the lower field, the plough waits in the pasture of purpose, beam, share, handles, all balanced by experience rather than geometry. The ploughman leads the oxen to the headland and lets the animals consider the do. He fits the yoke pins, touches a forelock, and takes the handles in a grip older than his grandfather. When the share enters the soil, it is not drama, it is confession, clean and exact. The furrow rises in a single courteous wave. Worms revise their plans without filing complaints. Behind, a youth with a basket of seed walks apace and a half off the plough, casting grain from finger crook to finger crook in a pattern taught by wrists and weather. A harrow follows thorny, and convinced settling the seeds into sentences the ground knows how to read. On the slope above the road, vines hold their winter grammar on stakes that remember storms. A pruner walks with a curved knife that prefers accuracy to argument. He counts 1, 2, 3 buds and cuts just beyond the one that wants sunlight and not vanity. A girl follows with a bundle cord. She ties a cane to its support in a loop that will open before it argues. The pruner smiles at a graft he made last year and at the shy ambition of a new union. In a corner, a hill of canes becomes fuel by agreeing to be small. A jug rests in a shade stripe, breathing cool from clay that has learned the trick. Olives keep other hours. Under a silver green crown, a man works a rake from branch toward basket, encouraging fruit to change teams without bruising. Where trees are generous, nets spread like arguments that end well. A boy gathers fallen olives with 2 hands and a patience that draws crows to watch. Women sort, sound fruit to one basket, doubtful to another, leaf to the compost that tells soil good stories later. The press will speak at noon, the grove makes the air taste kind. Near the barn, the trapetum, the stone olive mill waits under a roof that keeps rain from discouraging the floor. To round stones with smooth bellies turn on a pivot in a shallow basin, while a team pushes a beam. Pitted fruit and pestle learn each other's grammar slowly until paste is ready for mats. The prellum, the press, is a beam that looks like an argument against indifference. A screw rises from its spine with a wooden dignity. Mats of woven fibre circular, rough with history stack on the press bed. A wedge each set, the lever lowers, the screw turns, a creak becomes a hymn. Green gold thick as an afternoon walks down a spout into a jar that was clean on purpose. A woman skims the first bitter foam with a reed, and the jar forgives and settles. In the wine house, the press floor, the lacquer wears a slope decided in winter when nobody was busy. A screw press stands like a polite giant. Baskets of grapes arrive, pour, crowd the lip, and submit to the screw with a collection of small sounds. Must runs, modest and sticky, into a trough that knows where to send it. Down below, clay jars sunk to their shoulders dully await in a room that lets light enter thin as a knife edge. The must finds the jars and remembers to start becoming wine. On each rim a board lies with a stone that says, "We need not be impressive to be firm." The cellarer listens at each jar as if to an infant and decides which wants air and which wants privacy. On the threshing floor, wide as a country song, the harvested barley spreads into a clean circle. A sled under a patient mule carries flint teeth set by a carpenter who does not pretend to poetry. The mule steps, the sled whispers, straw and grain negotiate a divorce. Men turn the crop with wooden forks that nod at the sky. Chaff lifts and drifts toward the barn corner where everyone knew it would. Later, in a small wind called on by evening, winnowing begins. Grain falls in a bright rain from a winnowing basket and the air edits with competence. A girl runs into the moving light because it makes her feel taller. Her mother allows exactly 3 breaths of that feeling, then returns her to the pile with a smile that means good manners can be kind. Granaries on the farm are not showmen. Stone foundations lift the floor against damp slits in walls, invite wine to help without boasting. Sacks stand in files like soldiers embarrassed by uniforms. A steward's mark goes on each sack mouth, a loop knot, a clay pellet, a 2-stroke seal. A cat arranges itself where mice think about degrees of difficulty. The barn dog negotiates border treaties with doves who accept in principle and ignore in practice. The granary's door uses a bar that likes its brackets better than fame. The hinges do not squeal because oil was not wasted on songs. The kitchen wing of the villa makes afternoon into weather you can taste. On a table rubbed smooth by onions, a cook chops leeks with a knife that is the right knife because it has always been. In a shallow pan, a syrup of must, the sweet thick reduction, called by those who care about such things, is checked with a drop on a plate. The drop holds its shape. The cook says nothing smug. Bread from the farm oven comes marked with the wooden stamp of the household loaves cool under a cloth that knows its purpose and falls like a curtain at the end of a comedy. In a corner, a jar of pickled turnips tells the story of last winter in a dialect of vinegar and salt. Between the house and the fields, the pond plays secretary to weather. Ducks arrange their day like minor officials who have achieved wisdom by pretending not to work. A boy floats a little bark boat with a grass sail and declares it a merchantman bound for a city he invents and forgets 5 minutes later. The steward passes, sees the boat, and thinks of bridges for a useful heartbeat. He makes a note on his tablet to check the ditch below the orchard after rain. He draws a loop larger than usual to show it is a loop for chores, not for now. At the villa's edge, the boundary stones stand where the surveyors long ago persuaded geometry to share a drink with landscape. A neighbor arrives to discuss the water's behavior in storm months. They walk the line together, not as enemies, not as family, as neighbors who accept that ditches are more eloquent than speeches. They clear a blockage as a culvert. A frog complains on behalf of bureaucracy and is ignored. As a willow They cut 3 rods for future baskets and leave a handful of twigs for the gods of hedges, who keep better records than the gods of thunder. Rations are counted at a bench that never learn to be impressed. The steward calls names and measures out grain in a cup that has forgiven dents. Oil is allotted from a jar after a thumb mark on the level is checked and approved. Salt moves in a folded paper made of yesterday's list. A woman takes her share and holds it with a hand that knows the sums of children. A hired man receives his portion and points with a respectful finger at the weights. The steward lifts one, matches it against the master, and the air remains friendly. Trust is work here. Work is quiet. In a shed where nothing is allowed to become complicated, tools hang in the grammar of their use. The hoe with its forward opinion, the mattock with its backward insistence, the bill hook that speaks vineyard, the adze that speaks repair, the auger that negotiates with barrels, the sieve that thinks all day in circles. A boy learning the inventory runs a finger along each handle and names it out loud. Once the steward listens and pretends he cannot hear, which is a way of saying he's pleased. A broken tooth from the threshing sled sits on a shelf like a veteran. The carpenter will set a new one with mallet and wedge when the hour comes out of the hedge. Evening remembers the estate as something worth keeping. In the courtyard, a small altar smokes with a pinch of meal and a thought. On the veranda, the owner writes a letter to a cousin about olives, drains, and a electric mule, and seals it with the ring that has seen both weddings and rainfall. The steward ties the day's tablets in a bundle with a loop that will open before it argues and presses the house mark into a clay pellet that is more competent than any signature he could make. A girl counts the weaver's shuttles back into their box and says good night to each in a tone that means she will be someone to be reckoned with. Night calls the press room. The screw stands like patience that has nothing to prove. The dahlia sire bubble pops in the wine room and ruins nobody's sleep. In the olive room, the last green stains on the beam will be attended to in the morning with warm water and a rag that knows the difference between clean and memory. The cistern's rope dries on its peg. The boundary stones rest without needing permission. If sleep arrives, let it. Furrows will keep their lines, presses will keep their weight, jars will keep their promises, ditches will keep their manners. The year turns softly when hands do what they learned. Pocket pictures for the barn of dreams. A yoke pin snug and honest, a ploughshare entering soil, quiet idea seed flying from finger to finger, in a rhythm older than names, a pruning cut. Just beyond a bud, a graft bandaged with a strip of bark, a net under olives. Green on green, the trapetum stones turning like slow planets, press mat stacked. First oil walking down a spout, a screw press lowering with a creak that means right, cause finding a dolium's shoulder. A threshing sled's flint teeth whispering in straw grain raining through evening air and landing as arithmetica. Granary bar lying across brackets that approve a cup measuring ration with forgiveness, a looped cord, and the clay seal cooling to certainty tools hanging in a sentence that reads left to right, a letter sealed with a ring that knows. The family are small altars, smoke going exactly nowhere important. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches, the instruments of cities are here joined by ploughs, presses, rakes, and jars. The countryside's orchestra, playing the long music that keeps towns from being hungry and tempers from being foolish. If sleep arrives, let it. The farm will keep your place. The 12th part. A frontier is a breath taken slowly. At first grey, the wall and ditch are equal to the sky, only the watchfires remember colour. In the fort, the duty board, a wax tablet with tidy lines, waits on a peg beside a door that has learned to open quietly. The optio, second to the centurion, touches the board with a stylus and confirms the day's small agreements. Who keeps which gate? Who walks which interval of wall? Who oils the cart axles? Who checks the granary floor for damp that thinks too much of itself? A bell made from a bit of bronze helmet rings once, not to startle, to begin. Along the rampart walk, a pair of soldiers in cloaks share the night that has decided to stay a little longer. One counts paces under his breath and checks the distance between turrets with a way of stepping that can tell the truth in fog. At each corner, A clepsydra, the water clock the fort trusts, when sun has not woken, lets a thin thread fall into a jar marked with small grooves. When the thread reaches the line that means now, the watch changes with the same economy as a well-tied knot. Two men step aside to take their places. The wall keeps its breathing. Inside, barrack blocks built like arguments against wind. A contubernum 8 men to a room and rolls, a morning that knows them by name. One shakes barley from a sack into a hand mill. The querns up a stone circles, with a sound like someone deciding not to speak. Another fetches water from the cistern, whose lid fits better this year than last, because someone finally planed the swelling edge. A third trims lamp wicks and saves the crumbs of tallow in a shell. Later those crumbs will make a hinge forget to squeal. Boots are checked with a pin, and a glance hobnails answer with polite iron. The Principia at the headquarters wakes in a lower register. In the courtyard, standards rest with covers pulled like blankets. A veteran loosens the ties to let cloth remember wind, then secures them again, because ceremony prefers schedules to impulses. In the cecellum, a chest sits under a grate, and inside the chest are small, heavy arithmetic weights, pay coin counted last month, sealed with 2 seals, the cords crossed, the knots learned by hand. The signifer, standard bearer, squints at the seals and decides the month has behaved. In a side room, a clerk opens a box of wooden tablets and counts them without thinking about numbers. Each is a day's worth of ink, scratches, and order. At the long granaries with air under the floors and stone cheeks against mice, a storekeeper draws a pin from a hasp and lifts a bar that knows its brackets as family. He steps into coolness, tastes it like a baker, considering weather. Sacks are tallied with a cut on a stick and a note on a tablet. Wheat here, barley there, a corner for beans that have the useful habit of being honest in stew. He inspects the vents in the short walls, where wine does the counting nobody envies. Outside, he sets a bowl of water on the threshold and looks for a ripple that would mean rats. The bowl remains a mirror. He allows himself the length of a blink as celebration. Beside the granary, the bakery's domed ovens glow with a reason heat. A soldier baker turns loaves with a paddle and tests bottoms with a tap that knows the difference between finished and aspiring. Each loaf carries a stamp pressed into dough, the cohort's mark, so that bread can travel far within the fort and never be accused of wandering. On a bench, a jar of sourdough breathes with a cloth tied by habit. A young recruit learns the motion of dusting a board without raising it into air, as if declaring a policy. He will be a man others trust, which is the useful kind. On the Via Principalis, the fort spine road, a wagon from the river gate arrives with wax-sealed tags on its ropes. The quartermaster, whose face looks like an honest ledger, checks each seal with a thumbnail, then breaks it and slips the clay pellet into a bowl labeled today, not because the bowl can read, but because hands like reasons. He raises the wagon's bed flap and smiles at what he expected. Amphory with oil, sacks with grain, a bundle of iron nails tied in tens, a coil of rope with a splice that will not embarrass anyone, to new shovel blades, one of which will be claimed by the man who sharpened the old one to a memory. He signs the driver's tally stick with a notch exactly where it should be and nowhere else. Beyond the wall, the road takes its responsibilities seriously. A work party walks out with a ditching tool that feels like a verb. They cut back a bank where rain had attempted to edit the margin. A surveyor with a grommet's cross of arms steady its threads and interested in flattery checks a sightline, while a boy holds a pole and looks at the horizon as if it had spoken his name. When a cart comes, the party steps onto the verge, and the cart passes with its wheels saying what wheels have always said when they are pleased. A low, regular thought. Near a corner tower, the fabric of the fort's workshop smells of oil, iron, and the kind of patience that hardens over flame. A smith reheats a hinge strap until it remembers flexibility. He draws it out on an anvil that believes in edges. A carpenter shapes a tent peg with an adze that makes a tidy rain of shavings. The peg's head receives a notch to accept a rope that will open before it argues. A saddler waxes thread between thumb and wax and makes a stitch that will excuse the next 5 storms. On a shelf, a neat row of spare hobnails shines like a tiny constellation that prefers boots to myths. At noon the bell speaks twice, and the fort eats. Mess pots simmer with lentils that make good citizens. A ladle learns the path from pot to bowl, and does not spill its opinions. Vinegar and water become posca, which tells thirst to be reasonable. A salt pinch travels from hand to hand. No speeches, much gratitude. Someone tells a joke about a mule that knows more Latin than a certain centurion. The joke has been improved and damaged by repetition, and will not die, because barracks understand immortality. In the afternoon, a patrol goes out by the west gate with the civilized tempo of men who have decided walking is a profession. They greet a farmer mending a fence in the language of nods. They note the level of the ford by eye, foot, and small stick. They rest a heartbeat at a milestone that has learned to be older than anyone's memory of why it is proud. One of them scratches a little arrow or a plank near a muddy patch to spare the next cart driver an unnecessary prayer. They return by a different track, not because the world is dangerous, but because the map likes variety. Back at the Principia, the clerk copies a dispatch into a second tablet and ties both leaves with a loop that will open before it argues. He warms the wax with breath, so the stylus strokes lie slightly, kindly fat. The fort's commander reads, adds a small line that is gentle and legal, and presses his seal ring. A rider will take it to the next post, when the light has the manners of late afternoon. The clerk sands the wood where sweat has become a suggestion and closes the box. Tomorrow's words will find the box uninterested in their drama. Toward evening, the latrine, which deserves gratitude, performs without calling attention. Water runs under the bench from a little aqueduct that never learned to boast a channel, carries away what men prefer not to consider, and gives it to a field that prefers results over conversation. A soldier brushes a sponge on a stick with a bucket method older than debate. He returns the sponge to a groove and looks at the wall where someone scratched a gladiator who is never going to fight. He smiles as if at a nephew and leaves the room cleaner than he found it. As the day declines, the watch is relieved with the same letter of the alphabet it began with. The clepsydra's jar is emptied, its grooves wiped with a thumb, its rim leveled with the kind of attention that turns cups into instruments. On the parade ground, a short drill, not for show, for rhythm, step, rest, turn, rest. The body remembers, the mind wishes to be included, and is allowed as a courtesy. The standards breathe under covers again. The paid chest remains closed and content. In the barracks, a man oils a hinge and a door thanks him with silence. Night settles its small catalogue of noises, leather creaking agreement, a dog deciding which stars are suspicious, the rope on a flagstaff explaining wind in a dialect of fibre. Beyond the wall, a beacon on a far hill replies to a nearer one with a wordless yes. Then both decide to think about something else. Inside, a lamp on a shelf above a tablet burns like a modest philosophy. If sleep arrives, let it. The wool will walk the night in little shoes, the ditch will keep its manners, the seals will keep their faces, the clepsydra will count without announcing. Pocket pictures to stack with the others, a wax duty board hung straight, a stylus line steady to cloaks on a rampart, watching water count time, a clepsydra's thread reaching a groove, a handmill's circle, and the sound it makes, a standards cover lifted and set back, a granary vent where cool air speaks, a bakery stamp on a round loaf, a sealed rope tag dropped into a bowl called today, a gromer's threads refusing gossip, a hinge strap turned bright, at the anvil's edge a tent peg with a notch that remembers rain, a patrol stick marking a favour for strangers, a latrine channel running with the dignity of water, a paid chest's cross cords, a lamp's small triangle of light above tablets that will be tied and set to rest. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches, and here, walls, ditches, clepsydras, stamps, and drills, the fort's unremarkable orchestra, keeping the empire's edge ordinary on purpose. If sleep arrives, let it. The frontier keeps your place. The 13th part. A city is a sentence the law reads aloud without raising its voice. Before the market wakes, the basilica takes a long breath, cool stone holds. Night gently while daylight steps in across the threshold like a courteous visitor. Sweepers draw dust toward the doors with palm brooms that write quiet lines. On a bench by the wall, a scribe warms his hands around a cup and tests a reed on a blank tablet, one soft stroke, one clean curve, then closes the tablet, so the day will open it on purpose. In the measuring room off the Forum arcade, bronze standards rest in niches like old friends who agree on everything. A set of dry measures, modius for grain, sextarius for liquids, weights under covers of cloth. Their rims trued with a file that remembers honesty as a shape. A scale hangs from a beam whose end carries a notch cut where truth prefers to stand. The inspector lifts the cloths, touches the rims with the side of a thumb, and nods as if hearing a story he knows by heart. He places a pebble on the scale's tongue, watches it decide to be level, and sets the pebble back in its little dish labeled only by habit. Outside, market stalls yawn into shade. A grain seller sweeps the floor of his booth, sets out a measure, and thumps the beam so the grain settles fairly. A woman brings a basket and a memory of last week's price. The measure is filled, struck level with a strip of wood, and poured. She watches the edge as it goes, friend of edges, and smiles when nothing clings. Payment travels from palm to palm without drama. A token small piece of clay with a dent that means today returns to her basket, like a well-behaved thought. Under the basilica roof, the magistrate's bench collects daylight, not importance. Clerks lay out tablets, cords, and a shallow dish of charcoal dust that will make wax receive a neat surface. A lictor, more caretaker than threat on most mornings, checks the fasces, the bundle of rods binding tight enough to remember symbol, loose enough to admit that today will be about signatures, not sentences. The magistrate arrives in a cloak, but has learned not to demand attention. He greets a shoemaker and a shipper with the same word and means it. Cases proceed without theatre. To neighbours, one boundary, a track that shifted after rain. The land surveyor sets his groma in the door's square of sun and sightlines through the basilica across an imaginary field. He marks the pebbles on the floor and uses them as a map. Both neighbours see their past winter and this summer inside the geometry, and the magistrate invites them to say which pebble should move. One breathes out first, the other nods. The court writes a short line. Piece is measured like flour, struck level and handed over. At the counter of the Argentarius, the banker counters click on a board rolled into little streets. Brass coins pass across wood with the sound of small rain. A craftsman comes to redeem a deposit, shows a token stamped with yesterday's seal, and receives a bundle in a cloth tied with the loop that opens before it argues. The banker scratches a notch on a tally, pushes a pebble along a row, and touches his neck, where numbers sometimes stiffen. Then he smiles because some numbers, like some knots, forgive. In the corner where contracts are written, two men and a woman sit with their elbows agreeing about the table. A deed is spoken in plain words, the scribe repeats them. Slower the stylus writes them into wax with strokes that end the way they begin. Witnesses lay rings onto the tablet edges, press seals into pellets warmed between finger and thought, tie cords, and nod when the knot is right. No one reads aloud, because reading aloud would make it seem dramatic. The tablet closes, string crosses diagonally. The house mark sits where temptation would have considered entering. Temptation sighs and looks elsewhere. Time keeps itself without making a speech. On the Forum's sundial, shadow walks a bronze arc. A boy runs his finger along the arc and decides to return when the shadow touches the edge he likes. In a shady room, a clepsydra thread falls from jar to jar, whispering the length of a hearing or the patience of a witness. A clerk flips a tablet when the line on the jar says, "It is kinder to end this matter." Above the basilica door, bells that are not bells, just clever pieces of bronze tap in the breeze and remind nobody to rush. From the archives, the tabularium call steps climb into stacks where wooden wax practice remembering. Shelves keep boxes with cords crossed and seals impressed. A curator with a lamp's worth of authority opens one, checks a face no larger than a bean, and lays out a roll that smells of smoke and glue and plain effort. He searches by edges and loops, not by words, because his hands know where the right weight lies. He finds the old contract, compares its cord to today's, likes what he sees, and returns the roll to sleep. Archives survive because yawns a ritual here. Midday sends the market home for a little, but the basilica prefers continuation. A young man arrives to register an apprenticeship. His master lays a hand on his shoulder, as if to remind him of weight and grace. The magistrate marks a line for a fee remitted because someday hands that repair wheels should remember that the city once did something gentle, and the clerk writes the boy's name with care. Now are like roofs, you fit them true. On the colonnade, a notary holds court with a stall and a mouth used to fair prices. He draws up a letter of guarantee in the small language of it. Then that merchants trust more than friendly skies. He ties the pair of tablets with a loop, presses his seal, and blows cool air across the wax, because even wax appreciates kindness soon. A messenger waits with a dispatch bag that has seen enough streets to advise on shoes. He checks the knot against the one his hand prefers and approves. He will walk the rest of the day in the quiet company of letters that want nothing but to arrive. Across the square, the office of weights and baths conducts its simple grandeur. A tester drops a wooden rod through a ring gauge if it passes too easily. The rod is shaved honestly if it sticks. It is not asked to become smaller by wishing. A baker brings his loaf mold to compare with the standard. He turns it, listens, nods, and goes back to the oven that will thank him by behaving. In a side room, a man mends a broken balance with a file and the sort of mercy that works on metal. He finds the center again, the point where left and right tell the same story, and smiles without audience. The afternoon court hears a matter about a jar full of dyed wool paid for with silver that the dyer says was late. The magistrate asks for the jar. It is produced string-crossed, mouse-stewed at one corner, the seal face mostly still itself. The scribe warms the pellet with 2 fingers. The string opens before it argues, and inside the wool, as blue as an early morning argument that somebody forgot to continue. The magistrate asks who has the memory of the day. The dyer produces a wax tablet with a notch cut low on the right. The beer produces a tally with the same notch where a notch should be. The magistrate nods. The blue becomes simply blue. Silver will change pockets at the rate of common sense. At the day's edge, a crier walks the arcade with announcements rolled tight like polite thunder. He does not shout. He speaks at the level that respects shadows on stone. Tomorrow, a bridge inspection, the auction of 2 carts, and a cooper's tools, a reminder to tie cistern lids this month like last. People listen with the side of the mind that likes roofs not falling. A child grips a mother's hand at the word bridge, because bridges are thrilling even when you are 7. The mother smiles and thinks of sandals. The crier reaches the end of his sheet and folds it as if folding a blanket. As shutters slide in and lamps consider work, the basilica closes itself without offence. The lictor hangs the fasces on their peg. The magistrate leaves his ring impression on tomorrow's blank wax, just a touch, a tradition without superstition, then wipes it away so the day will not feel owned too soon. In the measuring room, the cloths cover the bronze rims. The inspector smooths them once as if tucking a child. A cat walks the length of the colonnade and decides that law is excellent furniture. If sleep arrives, let it. Measures keep their rims, scales keep their middle cords, keep their loops, seals keep their small, honest faces. The city keeps your place by writing it down and tying it once. Pocket pictures to shelve with the others. A bronze modius uncovered and touched with the side of a thumb, a scale tongue settling into a line, a measure struck level and poured clean, a lictor's rods bound with new twine that will open before it argues, counters clicking along a board like rain, a deed tablet tied crosswise, wax seal cooling to certainty, a sundial shadow stepping over an arc, a clepsydrum thread falling inside a jar marked with grooves, an archive roll unrolled just enough, an apprentice's name written. If it were a roof beam, a ring gauge taking a rod's measure without affection, a blue wool jar open to agreement, a crier folding a notice into the evening. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches now measures, seals, counters, and clocks. The city's quiet grammar, from making fairness a habit you can hold. If sleep arrives, let it. The basilica keeps your place. The 14th part. Evening is a craft the city practices together. Roof lines lean toward the last light, courtyards hold a square of sky. If it were a bowl set to cool, street stones remember feet without commenting. In a quiet lane, a porter lifts a bar from a door that knows him, sets it onto iron hooks, and eases the hinge with a fingertip of oil. The key he turns is not a symbol, it is a promise. Teeth find wards, the warded lock accepts the day's argument has been settled. Inside, a lamp is coaxed to life with a wick trimmed clean, it answers with a patient, steady triangle. Water has rehearsed its lines 4 hours. On an aqueduct ridge beyond the city, arcs of stone stride a valley with the modest certainty of arithmetic done correctly. In the castellum by the gate, streams divide and choose their duties. Public fountains, where children will bring jars baths, where heat and cool train the skinned to remember balance. Wealthy houses, where a spout fills a basin no larger than a good temper. A plumber, hands black with lead, ice kind taps a plug, listens to the tone of pressure in a pipe, and declares the night fit for the noises of sleep. At a street fountain, a woman sets a jar on the curb, rinses the rim out of habit, and fills it with the slow, polite voice of water that has never learned to rush. She wipes the neck with a cloth that is as honest as water itself, ties a cord around the jar's shoulder, and lifts. A boy stands by with a second jar, and the untested bravery of small hands, she lets him try, and then rescues dignity with a joke. A man arrives with a bucket for the shop's mop. He nods to both, paying with a thank you, then carries his bucket like news nobody needs to hear. The baths keep a low music down the street. In the apoditorium, sandals are left in rows that look like a quiet army. A boy keeps a basket and an eye on his coins, like a little accountant. In the tepidarium, warm air lingers in the rafters. Voices choose light topics and simple verbs. Hotter, in the coldarium, the basin's lip carries a ring of drops. The palestra outside keeps fewer arguments than in daylight, and the men who stretch do so as if sleep none forgive them for improving their shoulders at this hour. A slave lad with a strigil removes dust, no longer interested in being there. In the frigidarium, water does not shout, it suggests. A step is taken, and the mind nods, yes, this is enough. A housekeeper moves through a domus that knows how to welcome without boasting. The atrium's pool holds a small rectangle of sky when a leaf falls into it. The leaf is made important for a few breaths, and then becomes itself again. The lower atrium niche little household shrine receives a pinch of meal, a thought of thanks, a statement of we continue, and none of it is theatrical. The storeroom's door is opened, a jar belly is tapped, a lid is lifted, and replaced measures are in order. A cook checks a stew that has ended its ambitions with grace. He breaks a loaf with a sound that can be seen as much as heard, and sets a plate where a plate is wanted. Across town, in an insulae, the apartment block that stacks lives like chapters. Laundry is brought in from a line that crosses the courtyard like a soft argument. A woman folds cloth, not to make it submit, but to give it rest. A neighbor passes a bowl of stew to a young couple with a new child. The child sleeps through the best part. A mason who returned with white dust on his sleeves shakes out his tunic by the stairwell, then bends to pick up dust he made. Stairs are common property, and therefore personal dignity. Someone mends a small shoe, someone else pours a little oil into a lamp, and does not wish they had more because enough, here, is a practice with patient teachers. On a side street, a mosaic workshop returns to stillness. The day's tesserae lie sorted in trays, marbles white and grey, limestones warm, small squares of blue glass that bring the sea inland without a storm. The artisan covers the trays with cloth, not to protect cost but to protect order. He rinses his hands in a bowl and likes the way chips flee into the corners. The underdrawing on the floor, charcoal iron and faint pricks, promises a bird tomorrow whose wing will be an essay on patience. He checks the curve with a string and the pin, then raises his head at the sound of the street and hears nothing urgent. Beyond the walls, dusk walks along a road that has permitted wheels for 100 years without indignation. Milestones take the last light like old men who learn to love evenings. A way station, the Mancio sets lamps behind a door that knows travellers by the weight of their step. In the stable, a mule is brushed until he forgives a hill. The postmaster nods at tonight's roster of riders and eats bread with cheese, as if that was all Rome needed him to do. A relay bag lies on a table under 3 seals. A rider arrives with dust in polite layers and asks for news of the next stretch. Good ditch, kind verge, firm ford. He drinks water, not ambition, and leaves with the bag when night looks like a friend. Down on the river, a grain barge is made smaller by evening. It sits at a mooring ring with the relaxed dignity of work finished properly. The skipper checks the loop at the rope's eye, the seal pressed into a pellet yesterday that still understands today, and the hatch cover that fits honest. He sits and eats in a company of small noises. Water talking to stone, a rope muttering about wind, his own spoon claiming nothing. Tomorrow he will be upstream, and then a road will take the load on wheels. Supply is not a speech, it's a hand to another hand. In a workshop near the forum, a ring that will be a seal, which is to say, a signature that cannot be written, sleeps on a leather pad. The engraver cleans his tool and returns it to a rack where tools wait facing the same direction. He orders in a story told by someone who disliked drama. On the bench, a test impression in clay shows a dolphin and a sprig of laurel. The dolphin's mouth is maybe a little too proud. The engraver will soften it tomorrow, because dignity is quieter than pride. He covers the ring and the clay with a bit of linen and closes the shutter as if pulling a page over a paragraph that's already said enough. Night takes the streets into a register that architecture loves. Arches admit shadows as honored guests. A colonnade across the way hosts a lame dog that has learned the manners of columns. It circles twice and sleeps. A lamplighter climbs a short ladder and adds a measured flame to a bracket. The flame's light strikes a bronze plate that covers a keyhole and makes the plate think it is moonlight. Two women walk home talking about onions very seriously and nothing else. And the city, hearing that subject, agrees that peace is something you can buy by the handful and then slice into supper. Where the road leaves town at the east gate, a small shrine to the Lares of the road, the guardians of going and returning, holds a worn face and a clean shelf. Someone left a coin there 3 days ago, and nobody has been rude enough to need it. Someone left a sprig of rosemary this afternoon, and now its scent has become the night's opinion about travel. A gatekeeper ties the night bar with a knot that opens before it argues. He tests the knot, not from distrust, from affection, a habit of wanting morning, to find things proving they can be trusted. He pours a little water on the dust and watches it stop being dust and become a small, temporary road. At a small table, the night archivist, who is not grand enough to be called that out loud, but is that in the justice of deeds, ties today's tablets together with cord and pellets. He glances up at the lamp, trims the wick, and almost smiles when the flame admits it was time to do that. He stacks the bundle where bundles line up, if they were measuring one another for courage and finding there is enough. He writes one line on a page that nobody else will read. Market's fair bads peaceful, the east road had kindness. He puts the page under the bundle, not because the bundle needs the page, but because he knows that paper, when ignored, sometimes becomes sad. If sleep arrives, let it. Keys will keep their wards' doors, will keep their bars' lamps, will keep their small O's channels, will keep their levels milestones, will keep their patience cords, will keep their loops seals, will keep their faces. The city will keep your place, because the habit of keeping is the true empire, and it prefers evenings like this. Pocket pictures to close the book without closing the story. A door bar laid on iron hooks, a key turning where teeth and wards respect each other, a fountain jar lifted by a cord tied right above basin's lip with drops, like a quiet alphabet, a lurarium with a pinch of meal, and a flame that agrees, a mosaic tray covered with cloth. Color decided to be calm until tomorrow, a Mancio lamp shining, or a relay bag, and 3 seals, a river barge complacent under a mooring ring, an engraver's clay impression with a dolphin that has learned modesty, a gatekeeper's knot, competent and kind, a milestone with evening on its shoulders, a night archivist stack, cord and pellet cooling to certainty, while a line of writing forgives the day for being ordinary. Lamps, cords, scales, keys, arches, the instruments we have named again and again are not sermons, they are tools. Empires end in speeches, habits go on. If sleep arrives, let it. Rome keeps your place in the useful, quiet way, by doing things the way they are supposed to be done. Again tomorrow.